MusicalTalk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello and welcome to another edition of MusicalTalk. I'm Foss Ribbits, and we're here again to continue the tribute to the grand old man of musical theatre, Stephen Sondheim, who recently died at the age of 91. And if ever a man can be described as having left a legacy, I think it must be Stephen Sondheim. And to prove it, I've gone through the 15 years of the MusicalTalk archives and selected randomly a number of interviews and conversations I've had with people over the years from all walks of the musical theatre profession about Stephen Sondheim and his works. You heard a selection of those in the last bumper edition of MusicalTalk, and this time it's going to be no different. More archive recordings about Stephen Sondheim, covering any number of aspects of his life and career. Now, MusicalTalk will be discussing the legacy of Stephen Sondheim next year and probably forever after. But for the time being, I hope that you enjoy this selection of recordings from the extensive MusicalTalk Sondheim archive, in tribute to the man Stephen Sondheim, to whom we all owe so much. MusicalTalk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast.
Neil Somerville, and I'm the musical director for Putting It Together.
Now, tell me, Putting It Together is a Sondheim review which I think was written in the late 90s?
Early 90s, 93 by Julie Mackenzie, and then revived for the late 90s for the Broadway production.
Which had
George Hearn, Carol Burnett.
And the recording has got
Ruthie Henschel.
No, I'm thinking, so this is my memory's going awfully. Played Mary Poppins. I should be able to remember her name.
Oh, Susan Egan. No,
the original.
Oh, Julie Andrews.
Julie Andrews.
Sorry, yes. She did the original one, 93. Yeah.
What made you decide to pick that? Is it significant that it's Sondheim's 80th birthday? Or?
That was part of the decision. We were originally thinking about putting on Parade, but cost of the Fringe and and everything sort of came into consideration, and decided that we'd want to do more of a review style show. I had a chat with the director producer and said, seeing as it's Sondheim's 80th, it would be great to put it on, and so grateful that we have. Yeah.
Now tell me, were you a fan of Sondheim before you were connected?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
And where did he sort of first hove into view for you?
First time I ever really got knowing about him was when I worked in the States in 2002. I worked in a performing arts centre with kids, and we did Into the Woods.
Oh, really?
And fell in love with it straight away. Since then, I've done it again. I was assistant musical director for a college production. Done Sweeney Todd twice. Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. Just done Side by Side down south about 6 weeks ago.
Which is the earlier review, so you're almost doing them in sequence.
Indeed, yes.
There's no later one yet, is there?
I don't think so. There's Marry Me a Little and there's You're Gonna Love Tomorrow, I think, are the two other ones, but I can't remember where they come in terms
into
of
the sequence.
Yeah.
Now, Putting It Together is not that often put on here in Britain, I don't think. Certainly I've not seen hide nor hair of it in years. So why that particular review? Was it that you were intent on doing a review and you wanted that one, or did you just look at the range and think?
I think intent on doing a review, and also because it's had the DVD that's out of it, so people can relate to that, something like they may have seen.
To name it, twinkles in the background.
Yeah.
If people haven't seen the show.
Yeah.
But of course, for Edinburgh, you can't. Well, it's very difficult to put on a full show, so it has to be abridged slightly. So how did that process?
There was a lot of things to take into consideration for that, because the show itself is so well structured as a piece. There was a 2-act piece. There's a loose story of the cocktail party.
Isn't it? It's where two couples and a single man.
Two couples and the script it says mysterious party guest, but we kind of changed it to the kind of the bartender type thing in our version. So I wanted to make sure that every person had a good selection of songs, but also that the piece was balanced. Like there's the duet with the young couple, Unworthy of Your Love, balances Country House with the older couple. Then there's the reflection songs after the Back of Business, which is the start of Act 2, where there's normally all four of the main characters do a song, but we just wanted to cut it down, so we've got one female, one male, make sure we had a couple of male duets in there, a couple of female duets, but also without losing the thread. So it did take a bit of a while to work out which ones to cut.
So it's not mixed of a logistical cutting and also artistic cutting, making sure that the logistics doesn't unbalance the artistry. Did you lose any songs particularly that you regret?
Well, all of them, really. It would have been ideal to do them all. I think Like It Was would have been nice to put in at the end, but Gail, who plays Woman 1, who's got one of the best songs. She's got Could I Leave You and
Not Getting Married
Today, which is another showstopper, and she's got Ladies Who Lunch, and so she had all sort of the big songs, but then so I had to, I think to make it fair I had to cut at least one of her ones, so cut that and cut My Husband the Pig before Everyday Little Death.
Which is cut, it's a cut song from the original.
Yes. Yeah.
I like that. There's several songs which aren't actually have been cut from earlier shows which make it into the review.
There's Always a Woman, ideal. The duet from Anyone Can Whistle is brilliant.
It's a cracking song. I've always liked it, and it wasn't included in the Anyone Can Whistle that was on in London recently.
Was it not?
No,
I didn't see that.
Because it started to get its way back into the score in certain concert versions.
The '95 one with Barney Peters, I think.
That's right, absolutely. You know your stuff.
I do know my stuff.
It seemed to me, however, the principal loss to the piece, presumably for time reasons, was actually the dialogue and the, if you like, the acting in between the songs. For good and obvious reasons. So we had our wine waiter essentially rather splendidly and pithily declaring what the sort of the tone of the next section was, and that seemed to work. The audience were intelligent enough to join the dots.
And in the script, there's not actually much dialogue in there. I don't know the '93 production too well.
There's a fair bit.
Right, there's not much actually in the version that we had, the '99 one. It is basically, I think, just him, as you say, introducing the next scene or the next song.
Secretly, do you have a particular song that you like from it, that you like over others? Because I do. I'll show you mine if you show me yours.
All right, I'd say my favourite. Oh, it's a toughie. I love the arrangement of Being Alive. I think that 5-part arrangement works really well, and each character's got their little journey on it. So the lyrics have been divided up so cleverly. I love Everyday Little Death.
My favourite song is Live Alone and Like It, actually.
All right, short little number there.
From Dick Tracy, of course. There's a couple of numbers from Dick Tracy. It's the forgotten Sondheim musical in
because
some
it was
ways.
a film, wasn't it? So,
it was, but there are 5 solid numbers from the film. And Live Alone and Like It is the one that's less well known than all the others, because instead of having Madonna sing it, Mel Torme sings it on the radio in the background of a montage. So people just sort of, it flies by and no one knows it's...
but it's a great little number. And it's got a good style and a bit different.
Now, from your point of view, you're musically directing. Did you do the arrangements?
Orchestration? No, they're the band parts that came, but
they're quite sparse. It's a small group you have.
It's a small group for space reasons and for logistics and to do with the sound levels and stuff like that. There's meant to be 4 reeds, I think there's meant to be, but what I've done is I've given the clarinetist the oboe and the clarinet part to so he's reading between the two, and I've got a trombonist covering the bassoon and the trumpet part. I thought it was kind of a good way to sort of span the brass side and the bass side of the wind section. And then I've got my bass and drums, which I kind of need with me on keys.
And conducting, of course, which is quite difficult, is it not?
You do a lot of headwork. A lot of headbutting, yes, a lot of headbutting.
Pointing over there with your head and pointing over there.
Yeah. That's the thing. I mean, I find as a musical director, you kind of need to be able to do now, because a lot of band sizes are being reduced, for cost. You kind of have to be able to
fully
play.
Understand. But I tell you what, there are certain unexpected benefits. I mean, the great thing about the venue, which is Augustine's, is it's just the right size in some senses for that group. It's a very intimate venue, so it's good for the review. And although it was a sparse group, spare group almost, every drop of orchestration came through. So it was a delight to be able to dwell upon it.
Thank you.
I thought musically it worked well. I thought it worked very well, tremendously across the board. But it was so often you listen to a Sondheim lyric, and that's a full-time job. You don't idly listen to a Sondheim lyric.
Of course not, no.
You intently listen. And so it's quite often that the music is, if you like, a contextual bed rather than actually a piece in its own right. And I don't think that was the case here. I actually think that it was a very splendid fusing of listening to those lyrics, but also being able to pick out some of the
enhanced,
absolutely. So I actually think it worked very much in favour of the piece.
Thank you.
I think you handled it tremendously well. your cast. It's 3 chaps, 2 lasses,
Yes.
who are numbered woman 1,
Woman 2, man 1, man 2, man 3, yes.
And for the most part, 4 British performers plus an American.
3 British performers and 2 Americans.
Who's the second? I know the wine waiter was the American.
Yes.
Who's the second American?
Woman 2.
Oh, really? The darker lady?
Yes.
Yeah, the lady with the brunette hair. Oh, right, you know. Well, that's very interesting because I didn't pick that up at all.
All right.
Because everyone is singing with an American accent. Did you spot any differences in the performance styles? Because I always think that British musicals and American musicals, or the approach to autumn, are quite different.
What, sorry, in terms of the actors,
Yes.
you mean? I think that's a kind of difficult question to answer because the 3 British cast members we've got are professional and have all gone through their training and have worked in the industry. The 2 Americans are over on an internship and they're going into their final year of training. So it kind of
It's like work year.
Yeah, So while they're both actually from University College of Florida, and while all their friends are all working in Disneyland, dressed as Mickey Mouse, they've decided to come over here and do the Fringe.
Yes.
So
rather better view in my view.
absolutely, and they're loving it.
No one gets 5 stars for being Mickey Mouse, unfortunately.
Indeed.
The chap playing the waiter I thought was very striking because he's actually at the beginning handing out programmes in a slightly sullen mood.
Yes.
Which, deliberately so, which I think the audience didn't quite get at first. We didn't quite know how to take it. But we realised he was an actor rather than actually a member of staff front of house. But it was interesting. You were immediately put on your mettle. You weren't allowed to relax the moment you arrived, which was quite good actually. Sort of helped raise the pitch intellectually, actually, fun enough, or certainly of expectation. So I thought that worked very well.
Okay, thank you.
Though in a strange way, that part is slightly thinner spread, isn't it?
Yeah.
He doesn't have so many songs just because he has fewer people to react with, or if he does it more generically.
Yeah, that's right. And then so it's a bit of a blessing for him when he gets to his big song. He's got Buddy's Blues in the second towards the end of the show. He hears his introduction and it's my turn.
Yes, you can see him chomping at the bit.
Yeah.
But he's in all the group numbers. I very much like the beginning of Act 2, which is Back in Business. Once again, a Dick Tracy number. Gives you just that. I mean, obviously it would start the second act, but these are fused together. It still gives you an energy lift.
Yeah, and that and putting it together, the kind of 2 songs that kind of you take out of context of the show, and then it's the man threes with the waiters, and so back to the cocktail party. So it's just a bit of fun.
Framing device, obviously. Yeah. Absolutely. Were there any difficulties with the score? I'm not talking professional difficulties. I'm just saying it is an intricate piece. All sometimes intricate anyway. I mean, it's like it's not just reading a score, performing a score. It's like performing a score on a jigsaw that you have to make up yourself in a way. What do you, in your professional capacity, how do you find Sondheim as a writer of music?
I think he's the top of his field and has been for the last 50 years, 60, whatever, since getting his teeth into Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, obviously. But lyrically, you can't beat him. So I think because he's set the benchmark for composer lyricists, and that's why we've had such a big influx over the last sort of 20, 30 years.
But when you look at one of his scores, does it even now as an aficionado, do you find surprises in there? Do you think, that's...
Occasionally, but because I'm kind of, since, as I said, doing Into the Woods about 8 years ago, I can get my hands and listen to any bit of Sondheim. There's multiple recordings, so I know that I know the rep.
Rhythm which you found,
I know the rep. So there's a couple of odd notes kind of creep in. Actually, more so with the band parts, I'd say, and with the orchestrations as opposed to the singing, teaching the notes.
That's interesting. What kind of things would they be?
With things like Sooner or Later, noticed that just even over the past couple of days, putting the band in, there's notes that could really throw the singer off, and I don't know whether that's maybe they're more exposed because I don't have the full orchestration there, so to sort of to blend. So there's a couple of notes in there that I was thinking, is that? Are you sure you're playing that right? And we've checked the score, and he is, yeah. So it's.
I see. It's interesting because Charles Strauss, who wrote Annie, said that he thinks that composers are people, or great composers are people who mishear music. They hear it differently, and therefore, what I, as a normal person, might expect is confounded ever so slightly by their genius, I suppose. And it seems to me that that's illustrated again with Sondheim. But as you say, is that right note? Oh, yes, it is the right note. Right, it must be done for a reason.
Yeah.
Do you find that he rings the changes? I was speaking to a performer who was saying that you can never take a Sondheim score for granted because although it may sound as though he's repeating phrases, there's always a subtle difference in
Absolutely.
each repetition.
Whether it be one note or whether it be a dynamic or an accent, it's always something slightly different.
Well, then added it was a bugger to sing as a result, but always open for investigation. So you have experienced that.
Yeah.
How did the cast respond to it as a piece? I mean, were they able to? Because it's been in rehearsal for. I mean, it's an absolutely top-notch, crisp, immaculate show. Make no bounds about it. And all the work that's gone into honing it is very clearly there on stage, and it works marvellously. But it's taken a while to do that, hasn't it?
We started rehearsing on 12th of July, so we had a 4-week rehearsal period. 2 weeks where I basically note bashed and got it up, taught the
Did you say
dots.
note bashed?
Note bashed, yes.
That's a technical term I haven't come across.
Do the note bashing, get the dots down. Did that for 2 weeks, and then spent 2 weeks kind of staging it, putting it on his feet, and then tightening it up and getting a few runs in. And the cast responded really well. We've got, let's say, 3 professionally trained actors, none of whom. Oh, and actually no. I think Gail, who plays Woman 1, I think she's done Assassins before. But the others, Sondheim virgins, but they've all relished it and risen to the challenge.
They lay back and think of England. Well, I have to say they really have risen to the challenge. It has been awarded 5 stars already by Broadway Baby.
Yes, it came on opening night, which was a bit of a put us on the back foot a bit. Opening night had a review in, but it came in straight away the next day. And 5 stars, so I'm delighted with that, yeah. And
I'm also going to give it 5 stars and give you the word immaculate, because that is exactly what it is. It's an immaculate piece, immaculately performed and immaculately delivered and produced. So,
thank you very much.
It's just been, it was a marvellous show, and I'm extremely grateful to you. Thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome.
Musical Talk. Musical Talk's own Colin Molloy on Follies. Colin, lovely to see you again.
Lovely to see you.
It's been a while since you and I have had a chat.
Yep.
But it's about time we had another one, and I thought of the very thing we should be talking about. You are a huge devotee of the craft, art and life and works of Stephen Sondheim.
I am, yes.
And in London we've been lucky enough to have a star-spangled and star-attracting, in both the senses of judgment and performers, version of Follies.
Indeed.
We've both seen it. We didn't see it together.
Nope.
I've got a number of questions. I have a view. But I'm just going to ask, my first question for you, I think, is where does Follies sit in the pantheon of Sondheims? Is it a great? Is it the greatest? Is it... Where does it languish?
Well, it sits in a great decade. His collaborations with Hal Prince and the 70s, I think, were a pretty...
Fruitful?
Great number of years for him.
Well, the number being 10, presumably.
Yeah.
In fairness.
Exactly, yes.
It was for me as well, actually.
Yeah. I wasn't around. But I think it is one of the greats. It definitely does stand well alongside Company and A Little Night Music, which bookend. Yeah, exactly. But it's an interesting show in that it almost bears no relation to either of them. Although he did, which you probably already know, he did write Follies before Company.
I don't think I did know. I know that The Girls Upstairs, which is what it derives from, had been in pre-production or creation, shall we say?
Yes,
for some time, so it's perfectly possible.
And then I think he probably was Hal Prince. This is all coming out of my head, so it could be completely wrong. But they wanted to get going with Company, and I think the deal was we'll do Company first and then Follies. But I think whatever was Follies in whatever incarnation was around beforehand, which is also an interesting point because it does have that kind of looking back quality to it. Just going from Company to Follies is one big jump, and then from Follies to A Little Night Music is another kind of jump.
Yes, he seems to be going back 30, 40 years in each step.
Yeah, well, and then after that is Pacific Overtures, which is another jump back.
Even further.
Oh, yeah, exactly, of a kind. I think it's definitely that decade where Sondheim is being a chameleon of sorts, whether it's not musical, but it's definitely style and storytelling. I hate the term concept musical, but Company and Follies, and to an extent Chorus Line, are quoted as being the concept musicals, whatever that does mean.
It's often mistaken for gimmick, but it isn't always.
No, it's not. But I think...
You rate it personally?
I do rate it, yeah. Oh yes, definitely. I rate all Sondheim, and I rate Follies very highly.
Well, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions then, because I'm leading to a particular position on this.
Great.
Let me lay my cards on the table. I think there's a lot to like in Follies, and I think there's a lot to like in the London production. But there's always a but, and that is it failed on its original run. Yes.
Well, did it?
Oh, yes, good. You're
Did
giving
it?
me the good retrospective interpretation. Commercially, it was deemed not to be a success, and it closed earlier than they wanted to. There's a story, isn't there, of Sondheim in tears in one of the dressing rooms on the night it closed, because he put so much into it.
Gosh, really? I didn't know that. But I did know it was the most expensive show of its time, costing $800,000, which I don't know how much that is today.
Still a few bob now.
Yeah.
But it's popularly ascribed... Sondheim failed a lot in the 70s at the time. Maybe not creatively, maybe not
No.
culturally, but for whatever reason commercially.
Sure.
Why? Why would you... Do you have any view as to why it didn't sit or didn't fly well then and does fly well now?
Gosh.
I mean, I suppose what I'm angling at here is, what's its weak points? What's the worst thing about Follies?
Well, this is all personal for me, but
That's the person I'm asking, though, so that's
Great.
all right.
I think, and you may gasp, but I think it's the four main characters are not as fleshed out as... Well, they're fleshed out to a degree, but what I found from watching, especially this production at the National, is that the characters I'm drawn to are not the four main characters at all, but are the subsidiary characters.
Oh, yes.
Who, if anything, I want more of, but maybe that's their delight, is that they're there for such a short amount of time, or when they are there, it's just for a few number of minutes. That
They never outstay their welcome.
exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas I think the four main characters really do, and they haven't. I think they really bring nothing. Well, they bring something, but they don't bring as much as the other characters do, and I think that's one of its big flaws.
I'm not going to disagree with you at all on that. I suppose I want to ask you, if I'm probing further here, if I were to ask you what is Follies about, what would you say it was about?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm sure any academic scholar or Sondheim disciple would say it's about marital struggles between two couples, but really it's even on the surface a lot more than that. It's about kind of honouring the past, or even looking through rose-tinted glasses about how great things were, and to an extent probably falsely remembering a time with optimism, and not really, I think, about those four main characters at all. I don't know, what do you think, Thos?
Oh, nice back, if I may say. Well, I tell you, I think my problem with it, and I'm going to be honest, I have some problems with Follies, which is, well, we'll talk in a minute about duality and doubles, but I have a problem, which is I think it is a supreme score,
Yep.
but I think the narrative isn't particularly engaging, or rather I tell you what it actually feels like. I think you can boil it down and reassemble it again as a review.
I knew you were going to say that.
Oh, well, and you were right to think that, because that's
Yeah.
exactly what I think. Taking us back to the two central couples, the four characters, actually, their narrative isn't a narrative.
No.
They come in more or less as they leave. So there's not much. There might be a bit more awareness for them through nervous breakdowns, or at least in one or two cases. But actually, there's not that much more. There's no redemption, because they've gone back to the original. You know, the London production went back to the original version, not the 1987. There's always this sort of a alternative take, isn't there, with new
Yes.
songs and a new ending. They had a kind of uplifting ending, or at least an attempt at an uplifting ending. Here, the closest, I don't think it's a spoiler when I say, the closest to an upbeat interpretation of what happens at the end is that Ben has a nervous breakdown, and for the first time in his life he calls for Phyllis because he needs her.
Yes.
Whether she needs him is another matter, but she does come to him. So there's the possibility of redemption there, or at least, rebuilding a relationship, or recognition that they are not entirely independent, which is where we've been perhaps led to believe they are. But actually, it's more of an insight into a situation. And this is why I go for the cabaret thing, or the review idea. The cabaret narrative is actually, let's investigate a situation, which might be an emotional situation, but without a huge amount of narrative in it. And it seems to me that Follies actually does that. It's really, as you say, about these couples and their relationship, but the relationship doesn't change. It's actually exploring the relationship through song and through a certain amount of circumstance and dialogue. And then we, the audience, are given greater insight through the four Follies numbers at the end, which reveal more about themselves as individuals, not as couples, notably, I think. So once again, we're shown the working of why they are the way they are, without actually being shown how they necessarily are going to be able to, or have, connected or not connected. So I think it feels more like a cabaret narrative to me, which is actually songs exploring emotion or a situation, and not in itself a narrative. Because what I think is often described, certainly in the reviews, as a narrative, which is all the business about, here we are in the Follies theatre, which is about to be torn down, and Weissman is about to have his sort of last reunion and a chance for people to lie about themselves, all that fantastic quotation. And here is the wonderful Roscoe to sing Beautiful Girls. We get the setup, but that's a context, that's not a plot. That is a frameworking device which allows us lots of lovely songs and sketches, as you say. All these other characters who come in, sing their one or two songs, and then disappear again, are beautiful vignettes. But my understanding of them or their lives is not really enhanced. I don't get to know those characters. They come on, they delight me, they go away again, but they are just vignettes. Mm-hmm. The four characters who we're supposed to connect with, if not like, and I don't think you are supposed to like them necessarily, don't actually move on.
No.
And that's a really odd thing for a narrative drama, a musical. Yeah. I appreciate the word concept has been put in there.
I wonder.
But it's never. No one ever says this is a concept musical. Well, they do, but I suppose people. It's often pretended to be a standard musical.
Yes.
And it isn't.
I wonder. Do you think Sondheim, in trying to connect to his content dictates form principle, is really, if we boil it down, writing a review, and Follies is harking back to a Follies kind of review, and so
it does that through REVUE, isn't it, for everyone who's listening with their dictionaries?
Exactly. I wonder what the Scrabble point is from that word. Perhaps it's a deliberate review, and perhaps the characters are, I don't want to say that he's deliberately diluted them, but perhaps there is no reason for them to have any emotional connection to us, and perhaps on some level the show is just about the songs and the vignettes that do appear to us, and perhaps it shouldn't be more than that, and perhaps Sondheim shouldn't apologise for having written a show that is like that, and perhaps we or creative teams shouldn't try to milk out a narrative that isn't there.
Which is interesting. I mean, I don't disagree with you once again. You get what you get, and if it's good or it's bad or it's indifferent, that is what it is. But most of the, certainly newspaper and online reviews, have tried to make the point that the current director has gone back to the original version.
Yes.
And try to bring out elements of it in order to make it more narratively friendly. And one of the ways they've done that is to make much more of the duality of not just the characters, which we see in a very actual form, where they're the phantoms of their youths. Don't just haunt the piece, but watch and observe, and it seems to be a two-way street. They are judged by their younger selves as they judge their younger selves.
Exactly, yes.
That is all about duality. But to do that, there's an attempt, is there not, I think, actually therefore to create what feels like a narrative drive without actually being one. It's got the trappings. It's certainly sold, it seemed to be sold as, here's the story of what's going on with these four people and these two couples. But it isn't.
No.
And that, I think, is my biggest problem with it, because, and we've had this conversation once before off the record, and I think it's a point worth repeating, you may or may not agree with it. But actually, the Follies, the original Follies, the Ziegfeld Follies, what we think of, there were plenty of other Follies kind of organisations, but Ziegfeld is the sort of the master of it, and we're talking sort of 1910 to 1930, really. We're talking that period. It's a little bit either way, but that's the concept we think of. Was spectacle over content.
Yes, that is true.
It's all about the girls, it's all about the songs, it's all about the sketches. It's not for nothing that one of the most famous people to come out of that was a woman called Fanny Bryce, of Funny Girl fame, and indeed Funny Woman if you're looking for a sequel, who was the comedian, or one of the comedians in the Ziegfeld era, and there's plenty of others as well. Stars were made, but they're not plotted. They're not plotted here. They're, it is, as I say, songs, spectacle. Well, let's go to Mac and Mabel. I know that's film, but it's all about lovely girls.
Sure.
If that's your bag. So you've got that concept that ultimately it's a confection. There's nothing in the middle of it. Is it that this piece is Follies an amazingly meta-sophisticated piece by also being empty at its heart? Because it has the power to be emotional about the characters, but is it? This is my problem with it. I think it's empty.
I mean, perhaps it is, but I don't know. Why is that a problem to you, Thos?
No, well, actually, that is a very good. That's a very good question. I'm not saying it's necessarily a problem, but I'm not a man who's easily moved. And I'm not vastly moved. I'm intellectually stimulated by what's gone wrong with the 4 central characters and why their personalities don't mesh.
Sure.
So that, if you're looking at that intellectually, you can cut what you've been presented in a way that allows you to do a forensic on it. Whether that's the best way of leaving a theatre, having just done a post-mortem, I wouldn't like to say. But sometimes you can, if you put that intellectual, I'm not saying for one second I'm intellectual, but if you take that intellectual approach to something and you've cut it, is it inert like a body on a slab, or has it been given narrative drive, which actually hides a lot of issues?
Yes, yeah.
And it hasn't been. So I suppose in a way I'm getting honest inertia. Which sounds, I don't want anyone to go away thinking I didn't like it. I like it a lot, but my problem with it, every time I see a version of Follies, whether it be an amateur version, a concert version, or a gala version, which is the kind we most often get for exactly the point you made about so many, it's so expensive and there are so many casts that you need, I like it less, or I warm to it less. I admire it without liking it, perhaps.
Sure, I can completely agree with that. I wonder then, really, this show can only exist with an extortionate amount of money.
Yes.
And with all of the frills and all of the spectacle and all of the costume that perhaps the show deserves, and perhaps that the original Broadway production lost all of its money for.
Yes.
That's the only reason I can see it existing for.
Here's composer, musician and academic James Robert Ball. So all the while you've had this sort of increasingly developed love for Stephen Sondheim and his work. So we finished your time at York. We've tackled Goldsmiths, your first year there, when you were creating and writing and you came up with or developing Bang Out of Line. But you're there still doing a PhD on Stephen Sondheim. How? I've known people who said I couldn't possibly study English literature because it would ruin my appreciation of reading. I don't quite buy into that myself, but I understand it. Is there a danger that you came to praise Caesar, but now you're burying him?
Yeah, definitely. But
Shakespeare's done very well out of us tonight, hasn't he?
I think, not wishing to bury him too soon, it's a very loving burial.
It was a very tender cremation.
Beautiful eulogy, hopefully.
Everybody ought to be unmade. Sorry.
Unmade. Oh goodness. You're full of them this evening.
Yes, I'm full of something.
Yes, there is a big risk, and not even a risk, it's definitely happening and going to happen more, that the curtain is pulled back and there he is and he's pulling levers, and he kind of didn't want anyone, that's not really the point necessarily, to go and see him doing his workings, and maybe that takes the shine off Sondheim worship as a credo, but I then now think that that's a very good thing, that although we should love and cherish Sondheim, it shouldn't be blind.
Yes.
It should be because of specific things, not ever because of a kind of blurry-eyed appreciation of genius without understanding necessarily what that genius is.
There is the distinction to be made. I think it's actually the most important distinction, and it's so often blurred in modern life, partly because there's so many horrible things, but people seem utterly unable to detach the personality of a person from their professional work. I will give a very, very small example, without trying to offend anybody, but I'm aware of demands in a public library that books by Rolf Harris on art be removed because of his recent public fall from grace. Now, it's not for me to make a final decision on that, but from my point of view, there is a difference between... I'm told, actually, the library didn't do so on the grounds that the book is about art.
Yep.
And nothing at all to do with anything else. It's not about him as a personality. It may not be a good example, but it's the kind of thing. I'm not in any way drawing any parallels with anybody else, certainly not Stephen Sondheim, but the character of Stephen Sondheim, as portrayed in biographies, is very distinct. And then there is the work of Stephen Sondheim, which is also very distinct. One begats the other. But how easy is it to differentiate the appreciation of the individual and the appreciation of the individual's work?
It's not very easy, but it's absolutely vital.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
You may proceed.
that has been. I've only very recently started this PhD, and that
You're still on P.
No, sorry, just P, just the first stick, and that has been my first stumbling block initially, because I was definitely confusing the man with his art, and whether my job is to work out that he is. I mean, I should say that my thesis is that Sondheim's work is in some way postmodern. I know you might want to argue with me about that. People do, but that's fine.
Not as a theory.
Not as a theory. We'll see once we've once we've seen what that means and the point of it. Whereas initially, I was trying to prove that he was in some way a postmodernist, which I think is quite important. There's quite a big important difference. And then outside of my peculiar thesis, there's a big tendency to want to attach a narrative of this living human being with the narratives that human being is creating.
Which is so often the way of a biography, if I may say. And often mars a good biography as well.
Yeah, I do feel so. So, with Sondheim, something I knew, actually kind of before I came across that stumbling block, something I knew I wanted not to do for moral reasons was to really tie in his biography, either his temperament or some of the horrific things that happened to him in earlier life. I don't want to symptomize his output as something that has come because he was hurt. I don't think that's necessarily interesting. I certainly don't think it's fair to a writer, living or dead. I think it's almost rude to pry apart someone's backstory in that way. Not in the way that you've done today. I mean,
no, but you make a good point.
to make kind of connections. There's gives and take, pros and cons, that kind of thing. It would be interesting to explore how his relationship with Oscar Hammerstein was important to his work, or his relationship with Bernstein to his work, but not his relationship to his mother. I don't think that's pertinent.
It is interesting to a degree that, I mean, forgive me, you've made a very good point there, actually, but I have, to a degree, tried to draw from your personality and your life story.
We do it. It's a natural input, isn't it?
It's also, you do it more as we're young, I think. And forgive me, you still have the blessing of being young. Curse you. So I hope I haven't been intrusive in that discussion.
Oh, not at all.
You said something before we started recording which I thought was very interesting, which is actually that the subject that you're pursuing in your PhD has the potential to be sufficiently malleable and broad-ranging, but it is actually a little bit difficult. You're doing a very sensible thing. You are looking for the evidence to come to your conclusion. You are not starting with your conclusion and then looking for the evidence, which makes, forgive me, which sums up your intelligence absolutely, but and it's not always the way forward for all people.
Sure. I must admit, I've got a vested interest in there being signs of postmodern activity or thought in Sondheim's output.
And you must have detected him to come to the idea that it was a theory worth pursuing.
Yes, yeah. They've got to have a reasonable hunch, but hopefully I'm not going to ignore all evidence in order to prove that.
I think even from the short time I've known you, I know you are, because you seem to me to be intellectually rigorous.
Oh.
Intellectual rigour allows for integrity of character, and therefore output, one hopes.
I'm going to have that put on a magnet and put it on my fridge.
Okay. You will need to find an appropriate picture.
Yes. But yeah, it's something that I think comes to me naturally. I hate talking about myself in this way, but it's not something that I set out to try and do differently from anybody else. It's just I would naturally analyse and overanalyse things, and that's how I come about my outlook on life and how I comport myself.
Yeah. Very good, by the way.
So I guess it's just an evidence-based approach to life and writing and academia.
Yeah. Which is where we came in on this. We've spoken at great depth, and I hope with, in your part, great insight onto a large number of things, and that will come out in your thesis. But that is not yet there, so I'm going to, unfortunately, ask you idiot questions now.
Go for it.
Which is, in Sondheim's oeuvre, just off the top of your head, I know the answer to the first question, I don't know the answer to the second question. Your favourite Sondheim and your least favourite Sondheim show?
Best and worst. My favourite is Company. Obviously, I have that emotional connection to it. As part of my biography as to how that's created myself. But also it's just infinitesimal in its intelligence, in its complexity, in its meaningfulness. There's not a word out of place in Company.
I would like to draw anyone who's listening to this to your website, if I may,
Okay.
which I'm going to ask you to give the details of in a second, but there is a very excellent essay just on the opening number in Company, is there not, where you analyse exactly what you've just said there. The different characters, the words they're saying, the internal rhymes, how they trip, how they fit, how they create a bigger whole, etc., but with such sort of intricate perfection. It is sort of God's watchmaker kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. And then, bizarrely, the impression that we get as an audience listening to it is one of tumult, of confusion. You can't possibly comprehend it. It's a cloud of noise.
But it's not a cacophony, I don't think. Do you think it is?
I guess
structured
that's
melodically to give it some kind of order. To me.
Yes, I understand where you're coming from, and harmonically that it's supported by that, by having a repeated bass of these alternating chords. I think what I'm trying to say is that it's I don't think you're supposed to understand every single word on your first listening.
That's what CDs are for.
That's what CDs are for. But then surely, I don't know whether he's writing it for the CD, but if he's aiming for the theatre, he knows that it's happening in time. He knows that the audience are not going to get it, not going to understand the close craft that he's poured into it. But for us, kind of parasites, as you say.
I didn't say that about you, about me. Aficionados.
That's quite a nice word. Aficionados, who just love to understand how it works. The clock analogy, we want to take it apart and find out how it works and put it back together again.
And then find it as marvellous as
find it as marvellous, yes, absolutely.
So what is the website? So
the website is just my professional website, I suppose. It's jamesrobertball.com.
Fair enough.
Standard. And then I've got my blog there where there's stuff.
And the songs from Bang Out of Line.
And the songs from Bang Out of Line, yeah.
But I happen to know that Company is your favourite, but it's a mood thing.
Yes. So Company is my favourite when I'm in that kind of mood, I suppose, with a certain energy. I must admit that this is my equivalent of eating a tub of ice cream is listening to Sunday in the Park with George. Particularly if the creative process is taking its toll, if I'm not feeling particularly
when art isn't
energized.
easy.
When art isn't easy, you want to find some kind of connection. It will be Sunday in the Park, which I would turn to in a much more wistful mood.
Yes. I described it earlier as Company is your majority report, and Sunday in the Park is your minority report. That's interesting. It's interesting also that it responds to your mood and your creativity as well. But this is the stupid question, but it can winkle out interesting answers periodically. What's the one you care for least, might be the best way of putting it.
I'm trying to think
from the main canon.
Sure. I'm trying to think of a whole show that I like least. I know of moments that I'm uncomfortable with. I don't know what you feel about Being Alive, the song, but I'm not a fan.
I prefer the first two options.
Yeah, absolutely. But anyway, that's how it goes.
Thank you. I'm glad you said that.
I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure if I was going to commit some act of heresy.
No. There's very little that can't be discussed.
Okay. So yes, I think we agree on that. But as a whole show, I haven't yet got into A Little Night Music.
Oh.
I think that's my fault rather than A Little Night Music's fault. Or at least I'll reserve judgment entirely. I've not seen it stood up. I know a fair amount of the music for it, and I know I've read plenty of things about it, but I've not experienced it. I'm yet to be touched by it. Maybe the themes are slightly above my head as it stands.
I don't believe that for 1 second.
Well, I don't know.
But it has... it's great for for those of us who still identify ourselves as being great repressed Britons, who don't let our emotions out willy-nilly. That Scandinavian sense of emotional reserve, for me, feels much more European than it feels American. And it is obviously a European story. And I resonate with that. I'm just going to give you an option. I'm going to give you my option, because if I was asked which is my least favourite, I'm afraid I've seen it, I've appreciated it, but I will never go to it for enjoyment, and that's Passion.
Oh no, we do disagree.
I thought we would haven't.
I do really like Passion. Gosh, what is
now
it?
You're shocked.
I don't know how to to defend the musical, but what is it? What is it that you don't? What is it that you dislike about it?
Actually, I suspect it's the flip side of what I've just said about A Little Night Music. It is not about reserve.
Okay, it's about passion.
It is indeed. The clue was there. It was like Les Miserables. Yes, it is about passion, and I am always wary of passion. And there is the danger of when you're talking about big emotion, and it's very difficult to conjure big emotion in a narrative of over 2 hours with an interval. And sometimes you have to play the manipulation game. And it does not help me that I find Fosca a particularly manipulative character. I know she's written that way. It's not hidden. It's overt, and I have yet to see the hidden depths of her that our young hero soldier finds. I don't buy it. That's my problem.
Okay.
It does not. It's not emotionally truthful to me. It is for some. It's for many, I'm sure, but it isn't for me. I can't make it work on an emotional dot to dot.
Sure. I can see how that turnaround towards the end is quite sharp.
And it might work if I was reading it as a book, because then you can put a book down and draw it from your narrative and find other things and recontextualize it every day until you find what you want. Can't do that in a live performance.
No. I think what I really like about it is its sound world. It's very strange in its own way, but it's also very strange in different ways, in the ways that the characters are strange.
That's a lovely sentence to that.
I forget her name. So, Fosca has kind of sidling, almost whining the music to be passive-aggressive too. Whereas, is it Clara?
It's Clara.
It's
Clara. It's Light and Dark, isn't it?
Light and Dark.
It's overt as that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Good and bad. Except it isn't, but yeah.
Whereas Clara's is kind of scatty in a different way.
Shallower too.
Shallow, intentional.
I see that. I mean, I don't understand what he's doing with her either. If you want my honest opinion, come on, get out, lad. You can do better. I like the Doctor.
Yes. I think I enjoyed it as a piece of. I've only seen it on DVD.
Oh right. And which performance is that? An American performance?
Yeah, it's Don.
Oh, for Don Martin?
No. The performer.
Oh right.
Donna Murphy.
Possibly.
As Fosca. I think I sat there with my partner, who is a big fan of big drama, and also a big.
With a title like Passion, that sounds like the right way in.
Yeah. And also a big fan of letters, like as a construct for writing. He's a writer as well.
Sorry, letters. I'm not getting what you mean.
Which I believe.
Epistolic.
Epistolic is what I mean. That. Like they're singing letters in some situations.
Right, okay.
So it just kind of ticks his boxes. And so I was sitting there very glad that there was a Sondheim that was ticking his boxes. So maybe that's part of the reason why I like it.
Oh, I see. So so it's extra.
Yeah,
as it were,
absolutely.
I saw it at Donmar. I was lucky. I saw it originally when it opened in 89, 87, 92, 93 with Michael Ball. Can't fault the performances, just didn't like the show. When I saw it in London, I can't remember where, in the 90s. It was revived about 4 or 5 years ago at the Donmar, and I was reluctantly dragged on to see it. I'm glad I went to see it because it was a much better production, it much more clearly thought through, it worked a lot better, but it still didn't work my emotional way. It doesn't work the way I work emotionally, which is reluctantly. And look, I'm just travelling through some of the sort of byways and highways of Stephen Sondheim. What do you think of some of the bits on the side, like Evening Primrose?
Well, I love that kind of thing as an academic as well as a Sondheim lover. The fact that it's lesser known is a boon, like on top. It's like if you can struggle to find something and then have to order it on Amazon.
There could be a song in that.
Yeah, well,
if you can find me, I'm here. It's said.
And I love those songs.
All of them. Because If You Can Find Me, I'm Here is, I think, the best of the
If You Can Find Me, I'm Here.
I Remember, of course, is...
I think it's difficult. I appreciate it.
The wind would blow.
Oh, you dislike that lyric.
I do like that. I dislike that lyric, yeah.
It's quite a difficult one to pull off as an actress. So I don't wholeheartedly recommend...
Trying,
because it's so...
Next time I'm an actress, I will.
Because it's so poetic in its language. And... I feel it's something that is quite hard to get necessarily.
It's a high concept number in many ways.
Oh, yes, definitely.
It's a fairly high concept musical, actually.
But I think it. I think it's really well written in that way, unless you count the quite fundamental thing that it doesn't read.
Yeah.
But yeah, as someone who sits and thinks about Sondheim, and that's what I like about Sondheim. I think it's a really good one.
And my final question on Sondheim for the moment, although I have a feeling that you and I are going to talk about Sondheim again one day, at least I jolly well hope so, is that I've been around the block because I'm an old man. To, for example, on Saturday night, I was lucky enough to go to the world premiere when it was down at the Bridewell, a good number of years ago now, with Tracy Bennett and a few other people in it. And then it was, it's been revived several times since, and it was on in London about 3 or 4 years ago. There are new songs in it, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
Sondheim revisited it from one of his earliest pieces from the 50s. He revisited about 2002, added 2 or 3 songs, and one of the great things I love asking my friends is, listen to this, can you spot the new songs? And one they can and one they can't.
Okay.
Have you ever tried that exercise? I mean, you probably intellectually know which songs are and which songs aren't already, and if you don't...
I must say I don't.
Oh, well, that's good. In a way, that's fantastic. In which case, get yourself a 21st century recording.
21st century recording of
Listen to it, and we will come back to this point.
I'll try and work out.
I will be delighted to know if you can tell. And therefore, I won't tell you why they could tell one and why they couldn't tell the other, or at least so we thought. That could be a cliffhanger for another.
Oh, okay. In terms of, I don't know whether you were going to move on to an almost moral element to it, whether someone should be doing that. With other examples being the song "Suddenly" in the Les Mis film, and then I think they put it in and it's the words, kind of taking stuff out that might be seen as important. I don't want to say something. I know people are going to burn down the internet if we say this kind of thing out loud. But I actually liked that they cut "No More" in the song in the Into the Woods film. I thought the scene was very efficient, which.
More was needed.
Yeah, no more was needed.
No more wasn't needed.
Yeah. Whereas no more is quite dense. It's quite wistful. It's quite difficult to understand the meaning.
Yep.
And then if we're Hollywoodizing this musical, which I think we should, and we should embrace the fact that it's going to be different for a film.
It's always more concise and trim, isn't it?
Yeah, it would have to be. yeah. With maybe in some ways that was too Hollywoodized.
Yes.
Shall we say?
No, you can. Go right ahead and say it, because I agree.
But I was really pleased with the Into the Woods film because I thought the changes they made were intelligent and important.
But you've asked me the question about, is it right to change pieces once in...
Oh, sorry, yes.
Yeah.
Haha. Yes. Why not? I think it continues to be a living, breathing organism. Theatre, any kind of theatre, is maybe unique in that it's never physically the same.
Yeah. Every night.
Yeah. It couldn't possibly.
Can't classify it properly.
No. And so what? I think if you have more ideas on it, then it's worth exploring. If people care, why not?
I always think that the Into the Woods is an interesting example of a developing story as it goes along, because certainly in recent years people have been much more struck by the idea of their. I mean, you will know. The original idea, at least one of the possible original ideas, was that we're in fact seeing the baker's child, who is the narrator, or it was conceived to be the narrator, and then that was chopped by James Levine quite early on. But everyone likes the idea; they really love the idea, and they try to sort of crowbar that in. And the Into the Woods in the Open Air Theatre of London,
Regent's Park,
which you may have seen, tried to bring something of that in. The problem is you then get a very unusual situation whereby usually they tried to do that there, and the child had a torch, I seem to remember, so you had to accept the child as a contemporary child. And then there was this sudden suggestion that only one generation ago they were more or less a medieval fairy tale state. So just looking at it from, a development of a society, it seemed a little brusque.
Did you see that live?
I did, yes.
Yes. So,
with real trees.
Sure, real trees. I only saw it on the Theatre Direct, the recording, and so you get a much closer look at everybody. And he's fully modern dress. And then when the baker comes on, spoilers, towards the end, but kind of as his silent father, whether or not it's the same person, he's now in more or less modern dress. I think his coat's changed. I think I read it as the show of Into the Woods other than the narrator is happening in the kid's mind, and although the baker is not literally the baker, it's his dad, who's taken that role for the narrative.
Yeah, I don't think they are actually able to do what the original plan was, just because I don't think
given the actual text that they're working with.
It's moved too far from that to allow that to happen. But to say, I think they're trying to draw something of that, and that seemed to be the case. I agree with what you're saying. I think you have to accept it that way. But it goes to show, and the latest film, as you say, so it's continually reiterating itself in that sense. Oh, James, I think that's probably the end of the conversation.
Oh,
but
goodness.
You have been fascinating, and I would love to do a lot more. But for the time being, if people are interested in seeing extracts from your shows and what you're doing, remind us again how they can do that.
Oh, that would be on my website, which is jamesrobertball.com.
And you tweet.
Oh, I do. I think that's at @JR_ball.
But they'll find you quite
Oh,
easily.
yeah. I'll just search me and it'll be fine.
Musical Talk pays tribute to the late Stephen Sondheim.
I'm Tom Littler and I'm directing the revival of Saturday Night Sondheim early work, and I'm also the artistic director of Primavera, which is the company which is producing it. And what we do is essentially to revive forgotten and neglected work. So it's not always very obscure, sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't, but we're always interested in things that we think are sort of underrepresented and ought to be better known, and Saturday Night definitely falls into that kind of category because it's an early piece by Sondheim that wasn't actually done at all until about 15 years ago, and in its current version has never been done in the UK, so that's quite exciting. We've got 2 new songs and a sort of edited score, which was prepared by Sondheim for the 2000 off-Broadway production. So what we're doing is in effect, although it's the first UK revival of the show, it's the UK premiere of the show in this particular form.
Forgive me, you've immediately sparked my interest in that, because the original, in fact the world premiere was at the Bridewell, wasn't it?
That's right, yeah.
Now that was, as you say, about 15 years ago.
That's right.
Now, it then it transferred, that version I believe transferred to America, and then you're quite right, there was a 2000 version which was tweaked.
Yes, that's right. Well, there was a Chicago version that was done by the Pegasus Theatre, which was in fact musically directed by somebody called Tom Murray, who is now the musical director on A Little Night Music at the Chocolate Factory, which I'm working on. So Tom and I have had lots of happy reminiscent chats about his production of Saturday Night, and then it was that version that Sondheim and Jonathan Tunick worked on to edit it into the version that it currently is, and it was that new version that was picked up and done off Broadway, and it's that new version that we're doing.
These new songs, are they songs that Sondheim has written around then, or were they original songs?
They're original songs that he wrote in about 1999-2000.
Right.
Yeah.
Can I ask, because obviously you will know them, what are these songs, and do they feel like they sit comfortably within the rest of the score?
Yes, they do. There are 2 of them. One is very little, and it's a plot advancing one called Delighted I'm Sure, which is one in which a girl is introduced to this gang of single guys, but when she arrives she's been bigged up by her friend, and when she arrives it's a terrible shock because she's wearing absolutely outlandish clothes, and they're all very, very shocked.
And of Cleve syndrome, in fact.
Absolutely. So although in this production she's played by a very attractive person, her costume is absolutely outrageous. So they all sing a song called Delighted I'm Sure, in which they're all frightfully polite while saying very, very rude things to each other behind each other's backs. So that's the first one, which is a patter song, basically. And then the second one is also of a similar type, but much more pertinent and poignant right now. It's called Montana Chem, and it's a song about the stock market.
Yeah,
and
those
it's
resonances.
Absolutely, and in a way the entire show is about the stock market, but this
it's set in 1929.
That's right. It's set in 1929 in spring. In spring,
when things were still looking up.
Absolutely. This is about 4 months before the crash, and half the people in this show have money in the stock market, and there's a plot line involving a stock market syndicate in which people have put all the spare cash that they have into a syndicate, which is organised by the lead character Jean, who is who is a sort of junior worker on Wall Street. And the stock in which they've decided to invest is called Montana Chem, and it is the only stock in town that is going down, not up. So the song revolves around all of the other stocks going up and up and up, and Montana Chem going steadily down. And it ends triumphantly with the lyric, Montana Chem did not go up, but it didn't go down first time. So it's a song about gambling on the stock market and the sort of vicissitudes of that way of making cash. But right now, it obviously has a particular sort of resonance, and in a way, it sort of cracks the nut of the whole show, actually, which is how do you deal with a society in which capitalism is king, and how do you deal with the conflict between a sort of old world of Brooklyn, which is where the show is set, and a new world of Manhattan, which is always the dangerous kind of opposition, and these are characters...
And yet live cheek by jowl, don't they?
Absolutely, half a mile apart, across a bridge. And
Acton and Chiswick, it's the same
yeah,
thing.
yeah. It's a sort of extreme kind of south of the Riverdom. The Brooklyn characters called joining New York in 1898 the Great Mistake, and like Sicily or any other place like that, they have immense pride in being Brooklyn and being Brooklyners. But of course, they're seduced in the late 20s by the glamour and the riches of Manhattan, which is where they all work, and by class,
which is a song Gene himself sings, isn't it?
Exactly, it's his sort of opening song and his manifesto, really.
But it's class through wealth, isn't it? Essentially, I mean that's one of his driving characteristics. He's aspirational.
Yes, he is aspirational. He's aspirational both in terms of both socially and financially. He sings that he wants to own a Rolls Royce, a yacht. He wants all things expensive and choice and rare. But he also wants to be one of what Nancy Astor called the 400. The 400 people who constitute society in Manhattan.
And is referenced again in the lyric, is it not?
It is, yeah. It is. And so he's aiming not only to become very rich, but he doesn't want to be nouveau riche. He wants to absolutely break into the very cream of New York society.
To drip class.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he bumps, in terms of the plot, he then bumps into a young lady by the name of Helen, who is
That's right.
a little bit on the sham side.
That's right. What happens is that he gate crashes parties. That's Gene's sort of weekend hobby. And on a Saturday night, he likes to go to the smartest parties in Manhattan, and he dresses up in his tailcoat and all the rest of it. And on this occasion, he goes to the Junior League Cotillion, which is like the debutante ball. And there he meets the only person who is not rich, who is called Helene, and does a very convincing act as a Southern belle. But in fact, Helene has secrets of her own, and it's swiftly revealed that just as he isn't a Manhattan swell, nor is she a Southern belle. But by that time they've fallen in love, and it's a musical comedy, and so on it rolls.
Now, it's quite interesting you call it a musical comedy. It very clearly is. I was listening to the score only last week from the mid-90s British version of the Brideway.
Yeah.
And I was surprised how perky it was, because I remember seeing it. But this Celeste, for example, is a very comic character. But some of the comedy, of course, is based in time. So, for example, Celeste has to work with a fantastic song about how different life is in the movies to real life.
Yes.
The score, at least, I think, underscores the comedy more than the emotion of Jean and Helen, and indeed the loneliness of the other characters. They talk about it a lot, but it's not necessarily, I think, underpinned in, certainly musically. Do you agree with that? Or?
No, I don't really. No, I don't. I mean, I think what's fascinating about the score is that there is a strange mix of, as you say, I think your word perky is very good. There is a sort of bushy-tailed nature.
Flat bushy-tailed.
Yes, flat bushy-tailed nature and a punning nature indeed. Come to think of it, of a lot of the musical numbers. But I think there are also some very soulful moments within the music, and indeed the opening number, which is reprised twice or three times Saturday night, I think is a yearning number. I think it has a sort of haunting quality, and I hope certainly that people who come and see this production will see some of that. I think it's a number that is underpinned with melancholy and with yearning and with longing, and I think that quality is there all the way through. There's a reprise of that number about halfway through when they've been out on their Saturday night and they haven't got the girls, which is pretty bleak, I have to say. So it is a musical comedy. It's a romp in lots of ways, but it's also complicated and it also has a heart, and it's not simple by any means. I mean, the most daring thing he does in a way is that the first act ends with a big number about how wonderful marriage is, when the lead couple have not really become engaged at all. But in a panic, in order to avoid a difficult question, Jean says it isn't every day that a girl becomes sort of engaged, and then you're hurled into the final number of the first act. So in that respect, it's anticipating Company, I think. I mean, it's anticipating all of those Sondheim sentiments about people forcing you to do stuff, people forcing relationships on you, perhaps unwillingly. So I'm not trying to detract from it as a musical comedy. I'm not trying to say it's not a romantic comedy, because of course it is, and that's its genre and its form. But I think it's got a lot of other stuff going on too. And you mentioned Celeste, and I think, she is obviously one of those Sondheim second lead women, like The Witch and Into the Woods, or like, or Joanne, or, she's one of those women who provides the comic counterpoint.
Yes.
But I think she's also
licensed to comment and to be caustic.
Yes, she is. Yeah. She is, and she's got that sort of very, very sharp, very Jewish, very New York sort of humour going on. But she's also soulful, I think, and the relationship between her and Jean is complex and tricky to pull apart. So I think there's a lot going on there, just below the surface, and I think that when you see it with book as well as with songs, I think it would be quite a rich experience, not just a happy light 20s one.
And I'm not trying. I wasn't trying in any way to denigrate what I suspect you're doing here. The reason I mentioned it is actually because I thought in the Bridewell production, the Artie and his gang, the single chaps left in Flatbush without the date, were pushing the Bowery boy bit so far, if you like, but actually they became sort of almost comic grotesques rather than real characters. But if you can keep, I suppose you've got to be able to show that they are, shall we say, working class, for want of a better phrase. Yeah. And make them real as well, which I suspect might be quite an interesting balance.
Yes, I didn't see the Bridewell production, so I've heard it was very good, but I don't want to talk about it because I didn't see it. But
perfectly reasonable position.
But I don't think they're grotesques. I think they're surprisingly real, and I think given the fact that he's writing all these songs for a quartet, I think he gives an amazing amount of individuality to each and every one of them, without ever sort of resorting to doing Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs characterisation, And what's hard to resist is obviously the temptation to go, okay, we've got 4 boys, how do we make them different? Let's have a sneezy one, a grumpy one, and a short one. And we're not doing that at all. We're taking them very, very seriously and giving them individual journeys and individual tracks.
Oh, good.
And I think they should feel like 4 individual people who are nevertheless very much a group. What we're doing to make them a group is that they hang out together on the front porch, and this is already in the score, but we've expanded on it, but they play music together.
Because they start off with one fellow plays the piano constantly.
That's right. Dino is a sort of amateur jazz pianist, and he plays ragtime throughout the show as scored. And Artie plays guitar and ukulele. So what we've done is expanded on that a bit, and we've made Ted and Ray play the flute and the saxophone. And
just make casting interesting.
I did make casting interesting, but surprisingly easy, I have to say. I mean, there are a remarkable number of very strong actor musicians now. It's not something that I've done before, but I was bowled over by the quality of people and the fact that you don't need to compromise at all when it comes to acting or quality of singing in order to get very strong instrumentalists. I mean, they are terrific, these 4 boys. And indeed there are 2 more who also play instruments sometimes. There's the young boy Bobby, who we sort of fancifully imagine is slightly auditioning to be in their band. There's a thing that goes on throughout the show that he's sort of wanting to join in the gang.
Yes.
And so we've given him a trombone, and he's sort of always on the edge trying to get in, playing very exuberant phrases, hoping that they will notice him.
like a male tomboy, if you could have such a thing.
Yes,
right?
if you could have such a thing.
Or a boy, as we call them,
or indeed a boy. So that's what's going on musically, and I have to say it sounds terrific. But what's lovely about it is that it means that they can all be individuals, and it's the music that ties them together. So you've got 4 individual guys united by the fact that they are all having sort of 20s jam sessions and hanging out on the front porch and playing music together because it's a cheap hobby, and jazz was a massive craze of the 20s, so it's entirely in period, and we have we are trying to make this 1950s score wherever we can sound as convincingly 20s as we can, and they very much play off each other, and it should feel like you're watching an improvisation quite a lot of the time, actually.
It's funny you should say that, because the score, I think, is very interesting, because you've got there are some bits which feel absolutely early Sondheim. You can see they're absolutely his kettle of fish. And overall, the score feels a little bit like the score that the characters are writing early on in their careers in Merrily We Roll Along, to a degree.
Yes.
Who Wants to Live in New York, and all that kind of stuff. Particularly the last number.
Yes.
But you've also got numbers which, to me, feel like they are COD 20s pieces, COD 30s pieces, Ira Gershwin lyrics, at least, which, of course, is something that Sondheim does later on in Follies as well.
Absolutely.
So, do you differentiate in the stylings of the pieces between those which feel like 20s pieces and those feels like later pieces?
We do a little bit. Sometimes it's the more performed and the more self-conscious numbers that are the more 20s ones. So, for instance, the song that you mentioned in the movies that is sung by Mildred and Celeste, we have a sort of a Busby Berkeley tribute choreography moment going on behind them, and it sounds very 20s to me. So I think, yes, Sondheim is pastiching. He's the greatest pasticher in musical theatre that there's ever been.
He's pretty much the greatest everything in musical
theatre.
Yeah, he
is. He kind of is for my money. But pastiche is sort of obviously one of his strongest suits, and it's a brilliant rip-off of 20s music, and he does it with a lot of wit and panache. And so that's what we're doing, both in the singing of it and the playing of it, and indeed the staging of it at times. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a sort of early Sondheim ingredient to it, and indeed a sort of post Rodgers and Hammerstein thing going on too.
So I think Hammerstein, wouldn't it, if it was
absolutely
early Sondheim and late Hammerstein? Yes,
absolutely. So it's it is a sort of mélange of those things, but in a sense that's true of all Sondheim, I think. Which is not to say he doesn't have his own voice, but he's always taking ingredients from different influences, and yet somehow magically welding them together into a voice that is uniquely his. And I think he does that as well in this show in many ways as he does in a lot of the later work.
He's a great infuser in that sense, isn't he? And therefore an enfuser as well, I suspect. What are your hopes for the piece? How do you want your vision and your hopes, obviously, to be a success, but to transfer, to go further? What would you like?
I don't know. I'd be very, very, very happy if it stays at the German Street, and that's where it stays. It's a lovely theatre. We are very much staging it for that space. Will Reynolds, our designer, has done a beautiful design which is absolutely in sympathy with a small and quite idiosyncratic space. It's a very clean design. If it goes somewhere else, it will have to go somewhere else on our terms, really, and it will have to remain the same essence. But I'd be completely happy if it stays where it's going to, and that's why we're doing it. We're doing it because we think it deserves to be done, and it deserves to be seen, and I think certainly we've all found in rehearsing it that it's a richer and an even more exciting piece than we thought it was. It has to be said, and the current economic thing has given it a sort of added poignancy in a way, because we know what they don't. It's that lovely thing of a play set before the First World War or something.
Yes.
That it's got this sort of hazy light over it, but we know exactly what's going to happen, and in 4 or 5 months' time, none of these characters is going to have a job, which is sort of chilling. Absolutely. So, I think it's particularly timely right now, which I would love to say is intentional, and it isn't really. We knew it was relevant when we decided to do it in sort of June or July last year, but we didn't know it was going to be this relevant.
4 months before the crash. Pretty much.
Yeah, exactly. So in a way, very relevant indeed when we decided to do it. Yeah.
Tom, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Musical Talk.
I'm Tom Atwood, and I'm the music director for Anyone Can Whistle, and sort of doing arrangements as well, but in a very dressed down way, as opposed to an exalted sort of manuscript paper and a quill and a wig kind of way.
However, I'm going to start with a compliment. Saturday Night last year was, I think, an undoubted success, and as a production overall and musically, and you must take a great deal of credit for that. So, doing something similar again now. New challenges? What have you learnt from Saturday Night? What are you bringing to this?
I don't know. Good. I mean, Saturday Night did go very well last year, which we were very pleased about. So I wasn't. I actually know. Maybe I should just be more confident in my work. I don't know, but I wasn't so sure it was going to be. But then it was, and it was all fine.
Stunning.
So it was all fine. This is a very different beast. Partly because there isn't such a strong convention for where the music comes from. With Saturday Night, there was very much written in the idea that one of the members of this group of friends played a piano, and it was quite easy to then extend that to make them into a sort of a jamming jazz group. But with this, it's a bit trickier, and with these sort of different, there are these distinct different groups of people that have to be identified, and obviously still with a small cast, it's very hard to identify three different groups of people with the same one group of people. So that's quite tricky. Musically, it's a very different show compared to Saturday Night. It's a lot more complex, I think, and so sort of unlocking the music and the sort of the root of the music has been harder, particularly because you're sort of trying to work backwards from the Broadway arrangements to try and find the sort of the gem of the song idea, and then sort of build a new set of arrangements up from the ground. So that's what's been quite tricky, sort of paring that back to sort of an absolute source, and then reshaping it for a smaller ensemble. But we're getting there. I think it's still the same rules I think that we had for Saturday Night, which I sort of believed in before we started Saturday Night, and the same rules we were using again. That it's the story that counts. So anything that you add musically has to be there to complement the story and not be there for just sort of fluff or decoration. I think, and I think that's what's sort of seeing us through. So we're getting there. I think
it's not curlicues, it's buttresses.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what it is. It's there to add, and if it doesn't add, then you don't need it. And I think melody is key. I think that's something I've come to realise with Lost Sondheim stuff, particularly hearing him talk about it as well. It's the melody that matters, and that's where, and that's what you have to add up first. Get the melody right and sort of put everything down from there, as opposed to building something harmonically up from the bottom. You sort of start at the top. But yeah, no, it's good. It's all going well.
To my mind, the piece is the first of the darker Sondheims. The previous ones, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, and Saturday Night, if you like, a more traditional or lighter or overt comedies. This one is obviously a comedy piece to a degree, but it's quirky, but it's also sinister, I think, actually. Do you think that's reflected in the score? Have you found that?
Yes, I think so. I think that's very true, actually, that in the where he tries to go with the music is a darker place, other than just music to entertain or to enlighten or to build on an emotion. He's absolutely trying to sort of signpost us down places. There's a really long number in it called Simple, which is sort of also scored out as interrogation parts A to F, but we've sort of reconstituted those back together as Simple. And there are sort of several mini melodies that come and go within this, which are sort of different people's sort of take on life, and they all sort of come for a bit and then disappear, and they're never really resolved. But there's a couple, June and John, who sing a rather haunting melody about a woman's place being in the home, but it's the man who's trapped at home, and it's sort of, and you sort of think, oh well, here's the start of Company. Here is the ideas about intermarital relations, and partners and all these sorts of things, which do, as you say, are quite dark and no, absolutely. There is darker stuff, and there's anger in the music, and fury, which and some of it you sort of think, oh, this is like some of it you can draw reference to. Not that I'm a particularly big fan, but you can draw reference to some of the sort of stream of consciousness rant nature of Jason Robert Brown's work. You can sort of see, perhaps in the beginning of There Won't Be Trumpets or something like that, just that this sort of, and everybody says don't, this sort of rolling anger sort of comes through both musically and dramatically. Yeah.
For you, how do you... I mean, we were speaking last time on Saturday night about some of the music being diegetic because the actors were playing music and some of it wasn't. It was, as you say, the invisible music came in. This isn't diegetic at all, is it? There's
an incy-wincy bit that is.
That's the precise term, isn't it?
Yes, as an imperial measurement. Incy-wincy. Yeah, there's a little tiny bit which is sort of like a tagline for the cookies from the cookie jar, which is sort of I'm like the bluebird, which is their sort of their marching tune.
Their yomp.
Yeah, their yomp. Yeah, absolutely. And so that's sort of the only bit that is. The rest of it isn't so much. But I suppose when you work with actor musicians, you just have to get on with it, and you recognise that's an element that's there, and it contributes to it. As we were a couple of us were saying the other night, the one thing we don't like is over humanising an instrument, which is sort of taking actor musicianship too far, where you start checking the pulse of a cello or something like that, and you start because there is this sort of old staple of acting musicianship is that the instrument becomes an extension of your body, and it sort of becomes part of you, and that's sort of all well and good. Yeah, it is. It's all well and good in sort of as a theoretical idea, but of course it doesn't. It's still always a cello, and of course a cello doesn't have a pulse. So why would you check the pulse of a cello? So there are those moments where you think, actually, no, we don't need to do that. We don't need to do that. We don't need to sort of apologise for the fact that we've got these things here by turning them into people themselves. And it's just about sort of connecting with an empathy in the music. I suppose it goes back to all the criticism that's written about and theory that's written about underscore and about what music does in drama and what it's there for, and about how you support and you can take an emotion from a scene and build it and change it into something else through the music. And sort of about stopping time as well. I think that's very interesting or changing time. I mean, we don't. This all sort of seems to happen within the course of several sort of linear days. That we don't jump forward 15 years or anything like this. But we are able to hold time with the music. We're able to sort of stop the action and have someone sort of step out and exclaim how they feel, and that's quite a powerful thing that music can sort of only really do it in theatre. I don't think you can use music in film to you can use sort of soundscape, but music doesn't. Yeah, music sort of has a control on the ticking clock of the world, which I think is what we're using quite successfully in this. I think
that's very fascinating. That's very fascinating. If you don't mind me saying. I'd also like just to take you back to, you were talking about the fury and the anger.
Yeah.
From previous conversations we've had, I know you're an actor as well as a musician. When you're finding anger and strong emotions in a piece, how much resonance in yourself are you able to find? Do you have enough fury in you to... Do you need to have fury in you to be able to do fury in music?
Oh, yes, that's interesting. Yeah, I see what you mean. I think... I don't know, it's one of those things, do I need to... do I have to have been a king to know what it's like to play Hamlet? Or I don't know. I suppose you don't, because it is it's the end of the day. It is just
extrapolate.
Yeah, it is just imagination. But it is getting a sense of those emotions and not. Is you have to recognise that it's there. You have to recognise that there is anger in the thing and find a way to communicate that in the same way that you couldn't do. If someone came on stage and just shouted, it's not very interesting. No. So there is still the actor's skill is still in how you demonstrate that anger, and it's the same with the music.
In a non-one-tone way.
Yeah, absolutely. If we came on and smashed the instruments up because we were so cross, then that would be the end of the number pretty quickly, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that too would be difficult.
Yeah, it would be very quiet. I spoke to. There was Stephen was doing this platform at the National the other day, and
I met Tom Little on the way there.
On the way, I bumped into Stephen on the stairs.
Sondheim yourself?
Yes, yeah. And
your story's going to be better than mine, isn't it?
No, I said, we're doing this, and I said, well, I met you briefly last year because he came to see Saturday Night, which was very sweet. I said, we're doing this. So you don't pick the easy ones, do you? And I said, no. He said, well, they're doing a concert version of Anyone Can Whistle in New York in May, I think, end of April, May or something. And he said he was looking forward to hearing it with a full orchestra. To which I went, oh, we've got an oboe. So I'm slightly worried that it might seem a bit sparse to some people. I don't think it does. I think the world that it's going to sound like what it sounds like. But I think the world that we've created goes everywhere that the story needs us to go. Needs to take us. So
and the venue would help as well, wouldn't it? Because the German Street is small, but it's a soundbox essentially.
Yeah, it's really nice. This is one thing I'm looking forward to, because the room we're rehearsing in at the moment is generally used as a rehearsal space for operas, because it's got quite a lovely sort of resonant acoustic and wooden floors, and there's a nice sort of warmth in the room. What's lovely about then moving this actor musician show into German Street is that it suddenly tightens up and cleans up the sound just by going into that heavily carpeted theatre, black box, absolutely, and so that you sort of get an extra bit of clarity without having to actually do very much. Well, that's what I'm hoping is going to happen anyway. But,
final question, if I may, then.
Yes.
What surprises of the score kicked up for you?
Well, there's lots of surprises actually. I mean, there's been we've had to put down our lovely colleagues at Joseph Weinberger, but because this is a rarely done piece, the quality of the printed material that we've received is photocopies from 1960, and you can see that because the pages have dates on them, and obviously and obviously the 1960s were before computers, before Sibelius, and all of that. So it's all handwritten. Which makes it harder to sort of see what notes are there. You can always work it out, and it's always there, but it's harder to see it first off. And I worked on a production of The Rink, which is a Canada musical, sort of about the same time. Yeah, about the similar sort of time. At Mount View, just before Christmas, and that music was similarly handwritten and and it's a piano conductor score, which is probably A3, has been photocopied down to A4, and so it gets even tinier and blotchier. And so that was sort of like a bit of a baptism of fire for me on being able to read such complex handwritten score. And so it's not been too bad for me, but some of the other actor musicians have really struggled with finding this, coupled with the fact that it's written for quite a large, it's arranged for quite a large orchestra. Whereas Saturday Night perhaps was written for a smaller orchestra, and we just took it a stage smaller,
almost a band. Really.
Yeah, it was a band. Whereas this is very much orchestral in the sensibilities of the arrangement. So lots of the time we've had to create piano parts, which I never sort of imagined having to sort of orchestrate for piano. Because you always assume that you'll be able to that's the one that's always a given. But so that's been the hardest thing with it.
So it's not just redactions; it's actually building up as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're concertinaing it in both directions.
Yeah. You sort of have. Yeah, it's taking the melody down to nothing, and then starting from the bottom up. Yeah.
Gosh, what a skill!
Well, I don't know. It's
no, it is.
It's just about being able to see clearly through it, and I suppose it's just the same as the text of a play, in just the same way that it doesn't actually go to work on complex verse, and you have processes to break that down and understand that, and then build that up and make those your words, not just the words on the page. It's the same with this. We have to understand exactly why every note we play is necessary, both dramatically and within the music structure. So yeah, but I mean, it's been very interesting. And of course, a period in Broadway history where the answer to lots of problems was to do more. The answer is always to have bring 30 dancers on, do a 20-minute ballet, have some set fly out, and then within the course of that ballet go through 6 different musical pastiches, and obviously you can't do.
Thank you, Richard Rogers. Yes.
Thank you, Richard Rogers. Thank you, Jonathan Tudor. You can't sort of do that here. So there's those things that we've had to play with as well. But I think it's good. I think we're there. It's very entertaining, and then there are some moments where you go, oh gosh, I was quite moved by that. So I think. So hopefully that's what it's going to be. Hopefully it's not going to be, I don't get this, because on one hand you've got somebody being terribly serious and dealing with a really serious issue, and on the other hand somebody being silly and clowny. Hopefully that the world adds up and you will get, oh no, I really enjoyed that, and oh my goodness, that made me think. So that's all I ask for from a night at the theatre. So hopefully that'll be all right.
I'm William Gubbins and I'm the musical director.
I'm Jessica Bard and I'm the co-director.
I'm Matthew Holmquist and I'm also the co-director.
And this is Merrily We Roll Along. So you are the 3 who have thought this through and have brought it to life along with your cast.
Yeah.
I'm going to start with the big question about Merrily We Roll Along. Is going backwards a good thing, a bad thing? And how do you approach that as directors and musical directors? Let's start with a difficult question.
I think it's a great thing. I think it adds something completely different to a musical, and it's just very nice for an audience to know what's coming, especially when you have such a kind of optimistic beginning. Even though it's the end of the show, it means it gives it a completely different emotion to it. It is very difficult though to try and direct people to think about their character development going backwards, but I think
degenerating.
Yes, in a way, yeah. But it is difficult. But I think you just have to tackle it in the way that it's written, and then think about it that way. We've never done it in actual chronological order. I know some people have talked about doing that, but
as a show or as a sort of rehearsal process.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
So with a couple of the characters, Beth, for example, I talked through with Devon, who played Beth, her journey from how it should have been in order, in chronological order, and she said that was just the rehearsal exercise to make sure that she can find objectives and stuff for
she has the misfortune of disappearing quite quickly because she's the first wife. She's not in it for the run, is she, as it were?
No, she comes in later on in the first act. So.
It's nice as well though, for the musically, you notice there's sort of often you have the little sort of motifs developing at the beginning, and then they sort of get built into more of a thing at the end, and it almost is actually done in reverse. So for example, in Beth's song, Not a Day Goes By, when she sings it later, she sings, I've died day after day after day after day after day after day. That's the big one. And it's just, when it's sort of meant to originally be sung, but it's actually in the second act in the play, it's just done once by Mary. And it's those little details that it's not just the sort of structure of the acting that's reversed. It's kind of actually everything. And it's very cleverly written.
Well, you can see the score getting less and less sophisticated as you sit through it as an audience, don't you? Because that last song they sing, Something Is Coming, is relatively basic compared to that frame.
Of course.
Well, to take the 2 extremes. And I don't know if you know the original version of Merrily We Roll Along, because this was the rewrite from the 90s, I think, which everyone does now. But in the original version, there's another song beyond that, which is the school.
Tomorrow.
That's right, which is the school song, and as such is a rather, I have to say, rather dirgy anthem. So at least this has got something. Yeah. I've got to ask you this, looking at the text, let's stay with it, going backwards. What does it give you? I mean, it allows you to peel off the barnacles of the characters. Yeah. But do you think, the problem is the characters, because by the beginning of the play, i.e. when they're old, they're not very nice people, are they?
No.
There's very few sympathetic characters, a few who've retained their integrity. There aren't many nice characters in that old-fashioned sense. Is that a problem for you as directors and musical directors?
I don't think so.
I think it's more exciting because you get to develop a character even further, because you're looking at how what's happened to them has changed them as people, and I think one of the main things, obviously with Merrily, it's looking at people and seeing how success has affected them. So for example, you've got Charlie, who becomes big, but he still stays true to himself.
I think he's the only person I would say who actually genuinely stays true to himself throughout the whole piece. I mean, even Mary towards the end loses it. and even though she's probably the nicest character in the show, but she does lose it.
She's the most thoughtless in a way.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think Frank has a massive influence on her and her path, which is one of probably her flaws, being so infatuated with him.
I think on a simple level, it creates jokes. That it creates little sort of subtle jokes that you get the punchline of quite a lot later, in a way that I haven't really seen in many other musicals. No. Sometimes the jokes are a lot more obvious, and it's kind of there's these little things that I'm still finding.
Yeah. If you're concentrating.
And it's been 6 performances, and I picked up another 2 today. Like little I'm still,
always finding
always
new
discovering
things.
new things. That's the great. I think that's one of the great things about Sondheim is how intricately he writes. And
there's always room for more.
Well, there's so much like very small details, which in my opinion what makes Sondheim one of the greatest composers, because it's not just your kind of basic structure. You have so many little intertwining things which, if you really think about, I mean, it was great because we went to see the West End
Yes, I was going to mention that later. It's currently doing the rounds in London with stars being thrown.
I mean, we thought it was very good, and it was very helpful to see it. But especially if it's weird for us when you're working on the piece and then you go and watch it, you see so many different little things which just make it even more enjoyable to direct, really, I guess.
And I think still our actors, they're still finding new things to play with. I mean, we're taking it in turns to watch and help backstage. But even seeing it, I mean, I've seen it once before on the run, but the second one, they were finding new things, and then they're now sort of, I think, relaxing into the characters.
They're starting to play the characters now, and not sort of the words. You know what I mean? And that's really sort of adding another layer.
But forgive me, now, where do you come from? You're from Exeter University?
Yeah, we're all from Exeter,
And what are you reading, by the way?
Well, we both do drama.
And I'm a medic.
Yeah.
Oh, really? So the baton is, or pencil as I noticed, I think isn't necessarily your tool of choice in your profession later on. I guess. That's really interesting. But, forgive me, you and your cast are young. That's nobody's fault, and that will sort itself out with time. But obviously, one of the big problems with this is that you have characters who start off 40 or thereabouts and work their way back to sort of late teens, early 20s. And they start off as these gnarled, barnacled characters. I mean, that's the best way of putting it, I think, to be honest. How easy is it for you and your cast, really, to find what they're going to be like, or what they might be like, a phantom image of who they could be at 40 to project onto their characters? I ask this because I'm not absolutely certain the West End version completely managed to pull that off.
I think the youth kind of works in a way, in that it's much easier to get older than it is to get younger.
Well, it happens anyway, doesn't it?
But I think also you can imagine what you'll be like. You'll be like in 20 odd years as a kind of worst idea. You can imagine, I think it's easier to imagine what I might be like in 20 years' time as a kind of not very nice person.
Don't say that.
As a bitter failed doctor. Well, but I think it's, you've got the rose-tinted goggles of what I was like 10 years ago even. And I think that therefore helps that you've got that youth to play with, and it's easier. Well, it's not easier, but I think it's a different sort of way of doing it than if you were starting with a sort of 40-year-old having to then dress down to mutton dressed as lamb almost.
Well, yes, it is difficult to carry off youth when you're old. But it's not easy.
It's not easy to pull off wisdom when you're young. But
there's no wisdom. It's all. It's the horror of old age, I can assure you.
I think we've approached it through sort of the emotion of it and thinking, okay, if you've had so much happen to you, and then how that would mould your character, rather than worrying too much about the physical. Like, of course, with the Fringe, obviously it being the Fringe and not being able to have a massive set and a massive backstage where we can make them up and do all of that, we've had to approach it through more a mental process.
Ways,
Exactly.
Especially with a 5-minute get out.
Especially with a 5-minute get out.
With a 10-piece band.
Yes, I mean, let's talk about it. I mean, forgive me, one of the first things you see when you come in, you see all these lovely posters from old musical shows and New York, and then you're, to me, enormous bands. And it's so lovely to see them not behind a curtain, because I've seen many bands, well, I haven't seen many, I've heard many bands this year, and then they briefly pull back the blinds at the end and everyone claps, and then they go back into their dark box. But you're there sharing the stage with your cast. That looks fantastic. Is it?
Yeah, I
to
think
work with for you all.
Yeah, as though directors, we didn't want them hidden. I think the thing sometimes with bands is they should be not as appreciated
as the cast,
and that's what we think.
Yeah, I find there's a definite it just from my experience is a problem that the cast and the band are always very segregated during shows, and I think what we've done, we've definitely integrated them very well with this show, and I think that helps them being on stage because they can join in. I mean, they actually get to watch the show as they're doing. Obviously they're concentrating on the music, but they do get to they do get to watch it and share with the cast, and obviously we all live together and we're all mixed, so it's more of a one company than just two
we see
separate
ourselves
things.
as a company.
I've personally played in many musicals behind curtains or under stages, and you don't really put the effort in, and you kind of goof off a bit almost, but the fact that we're all getting along, we are a big group of people and we're on stage means I can see it in their eyes, they're concentrating really hard, they're giving me everything, and they're not kind of letting down the cast.
Not at all. I think they're top notch. I have to say, I enjoyed it very much. It was a beautiful sound. It came across with crystal clarity, and it filled the room. To be honest, it was a luxurious bed on which the actors could lounge.
Definitely. And I mean, throughout rehearsal process, the two with bands, you stand there rehearsing and you're like, start, stop, and they just do it, and that's the thing. And you should never underestimate that, and never not give them the credit they deserve.
And why shouldn't the orchestra also get the same response from the audience? By which I mean, actors don't work in a vacuum.
No.
Every day's performance will be different because each audience is different, and it must be the same for the orchestra to have that same response. I assume that is the case.
You can see them relaxing when we get the first couple of laughs. The first day was a bit dry, and I think it was because we were quite nervous, and I think people fed off that, so we didn't quite get the laughs for some of them that we were expecting, and everyone was a bit tense. But sort of we're coming to now, it's being sort of good audiences, and people and you can see them relaxing, and they're kind of going with it and playing with the music again, as opposed to just sort of looking at the notes. They're actually being musical and thinking about how it all fits in, which I think just makes it a better show.
Got to ask, I'll just stay on the music for a bit if I may. Sondheim's a great one for using discordance to suggest nervous breakdowns or failures of relationships, and of course you have to get that across in a way that doesn't look like an error. So first of all, how best to do that, and secondly, can I ask, I mean, forgive me, how difficult is a Sondheim score to perform? I know as an actor it's hard, but for you as the musical director in front of all your...
Well, one of the reasons I got involved with this, I'm actually a jazz musician by choice, and this is, I would say, his most kind of jazz influenced one, and a lot of the discordances are sort of heavily couched in sort of jazz discordances like ninths and sevenths and that kind of thing, especially in this one. And the guys in the band are all from the jazz orchestra I play with, and I was MD of that last year, so they're all quite used to they're all quite used to the discordance I like. So
it also brings a flexibility, presumably, having a jazz background. It's not just I'm paying this is such a horrible generic statement to make, and it's wrong. But certainly historically, I'm going to hide what I'm about to say by claiming this is what it was like in the past. But pit orchestras were sometimes a bit rumpety-tumpety because that's all they needed to be. Whereas it sounds to me that you've actually got people who are already more flexible.
That's it. And I've been taken a bit of license with it. For example, the drum part in the written is very much back all the way through, and I hate that personally as a pit drummer as well. And so I've made him change it. I should have made more of the samba, for example, in Franklin Shepherd Inc. I made that much more samba to give that kind of difference and that kind of thing. And I feel that has helped, therefore, make it a more sort of flowing and that the discordance fits. As opposed to sort of just bashing away like a march the whole time. Sometimes it can be like...
I love Gilbert and Sullivan, but there's a touch of that in there.
Yeah, exactly.
So, forgive me, as directors, you've sat down with your cast, and how do you get your cast up to speed? Because, as you say, every word means something, every layer, and then there are the in-jokes, there's a lot of other musical theatre references.
Yes. With Sondheim...
that sigh, I think.
With Sondheim, I think, again, what is great about it, it really tests your cast. I mean, to be able to pull it off, you have to have spent a lot of effort learning like counter lines, just the lyrics in itself, the speed of the lyrics. I mean,
Franklin Shepherd Inc. is, it is a patter song par excellence, is it not?
I mean, that was actually, when we were choosing the musical, I'd seen Merrily before, and the one thing that stuck out for me was Franklin Shepherd Inc. I remembered that from when I saw it, and I thought, there was that great musical with that song in, and that's originally how we came to it. And It is difficult, but I think you just have to put the work in. You just have, even though it's tedious and boring, you just have to get people to keep going over their lines, going over. It is so crucial because Sondheim is so based on diction as well. Like everything, it's just a lot of practice and a lot of training for that. But with the lines as well, I mean, I think what's really great because it is so intricate is because you do find new things, and I think for actors themselves that is very. That's very exciting for them to read through it and think, oh, that's clever.
There's something to do here.
Yeah, I mean, there's some people who like Will have just kind of like backstage and heard something, gone, oh, that's funny, and then carried on. So I think it just makes it more exciting for them. It's just much more of a challenging beast, I guess, than a lot of other musicals, I think.
I feel we'd be remiss as well if we had the help with the learning of the sort of songs from this guy Jonathan Wood, who's another student who's sadly not here, although he is here with the National Youth Choir.
He's the National Youth Choir performing,
and he's a fantastic singer, but sort of a classical singer. So he worked with them before I did much more on the sort of the notes and the diction, and then it meant that when I sort of turned up, having done my medical end of year exams, I was actually able just to kind of pull it together, and he'd done an awful lot of that work and getting them to think about it classically before we could then take it apart a bit into sort of musical theatre sort of way.
So your foundations were there?
Exactly, very much so.
I mean, I think the classical teaching really, really helped because it's so much more of a methodical way of looking at it rather than as a musical theatre way, just kind of, it kind of sounds like this. It's much more technical, and that's he was such a big help with the cast before we came up.
But I just think the cast have been brilliant. I mean, cast of 10. And if you think
it should be 20,
and with all the transitions which sound so similar, it's been hard work, but they've been brilliant in learning and being committed, and they have thought, like, with something as like intricate as how the script is, and because it is so well tied up together, they haven't been able to skim over it at all, but they have taken the time to learn and think about the characters. And that's a really lovely thing to see, I think.
You're Charlie Kringus. I want to. All your cast is stunning, but he has quite a lot of reaction shots. There's a lot of, he's able to. His face is very malleable, and he expresses a lot.
Andrew Horton.
Yeah, his name's Andrew Horton.
I mean, they're all tremendously good, but he really stood out for me as someone who was doing something all the way through, even if he wasn't doing something. If that makes any
sense.
He's
a very experienced performer. I mean, our person played Frank Henry, the first musical he's ever done in his life, or play.
Really?
Yeah. He was singer.
He's remarkable as well.
He's a big band singer normally. They got into this.
All the more so, for obviously when someone told him to break a leg, he went off and broke an arm because one of his arms is in plaster.
Yes.
Absolutely. That's dedication.
He rang me 2 weeks ago in A&E saying, I think I've broken my arm. And I was like, have you told the directors yet? And it's, nah. I'll wait a bit.
I had a message, do I have an understudy?
That was a scary couple of days.
Unfortunately, he does all his piano work behind an upright, so you can't see him not using his arm.
He's actually also a very competent pianist, so it's a bit of a shame, but
just not on this occasion.
No, it's not.
But I'm not. It's almost iniquitous to pull people out. But if I may say, is it's Franklin is on stage all the time, pretty much. That is a big ask of anybody.
Yes.
And you have to have a certain amount of presence.
Definitely.
And you are the lodestone around which everything works. And you're not liked much by the audience. That's a hard sell for the actor.
He's quite a sort of old before his time man anyway, and so he plays that well, and then he's got a sort of cheeky side to him, so he does. It's quite similar to him. Not that. Don't tell him I said that.
Well, I'm glad we're not recording this.
It's in a nice way.
I do think that's true. I think the character is actually kind of, in a way, there are character traits which he brings through which are like him in real life, which I alys see when he goes on, which is really nice actually. It's really nice.
There's a Henry underscore for his part.
Amplified obviously, but
definitely.
Well, you did most of the casting because you found when we auditioned. You had a good idea of casting, so I think Matthew's got a very good eye for casting, because I think a lot of I've had people say yesterday, I think it was someone said, it was just really cast really well, and everyone sort of did fit, like you say.
Oh, they do, yes.
Did fit the part. Say, our Joe, who's played by Simon. I don't think I can imagine anyone else playing.
And he's never been in a musical before in his life. No,
Yeah.
there's a few. I mean, we've got Gussie. She's never been in a musical before.
And yet she's playing this character who lives and breathes.
I mean, she's obviously a very competent singer.
Yeah.
She's done a couple of like small shows, but not a sort of main role like
No,
this.
I mean the main two experienced people in the cast are Andy and Mary. They're both the most experienced, and everyone else have done little things. Yeah. But no, they've done so well. I mean,
you have got a good eye for them, then, if you don't mind me saying.
Thank you.
It sparkled. It really did.
Yeah. No. It is such a beast in a way to tackle this any Sondheim show, but especially I think this one, especially for a cast of 10, where we should really have 20, and it's just not possible. So they are having to double up on a lot of characters, which again is an exciting challenge for them to have to come off stage and be
back on in a minute as someone else.
Different accent, different person. It is good fun.
It's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of costume changes as well. I mean, Gussie seems to come on in a different frock every time, let's be honest. Or a trouser suit if she's in the 60s, for the Blob. Always like to hear the Blob. It's a good song.
Oh, the Blob's great. Yeah, we had a lot of fun.
Tough.
Well, I was going to say, as an audience, you always want it to last longer. But I imagine as in the orchestra, you want it to last less.
I dread it when it comes, and I'm happy when it's done.
You're not serious.
Yeah, no, Jessie has to take. She did the choreography for that.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
It works really well because they do become this. I mean, their last word in the song is gestalt, isn't it? And they are this kind of gestalt entity, arms flailing, but they are a blob. They come rolling on. And of course, I love the narrative parallels with the very first scene you see Frank in is a Hollywood party where he's surrounded by hangers-on, and they all turn out to be vacuous losers, and you can see that actually. That nothing has changed in society, but
they have.
It's like their perspective, isn't it?
Exactly. Where once it was something you really want to attain, by the time you get it, it's all hollow. There's a lesson for us all there. But I mean, the book is so strong anyway in this. I mean, it's I've always loved it, and you just can't believe it was a failure when it first started.
No, completely.
In '81, I think. Wasn't it?
Yeah, although that was back when their costumes were T-shirts with their names on and stuff.
Frank's best friend.
Stuff like that. Yeah, it is.
So. Bearing in mind it's so complicated, when did you start? When was the idea to bring Merrily to the Fringe this year hatched? 1978.
It was back in. It was during our first year of uni. So God, it must have been about 4 or 5 months ago.
January, was it?
I think you phoned. Yeah, I think you've been doing some stuff, and then you got me involved in about March.
Yeah, because it took a while. I mean, this is our kind of. With the Red Oak Theatre Company, this is our first show up at Edinburgh, and it did take a lot of planning.
Logistical planning.
Oh God,
Not just put the show on.
Just so many things.
Musicians
but I think
out 2 weeks before and everything.
Just lots of different things. But
you're all still smiling though.
Well.
But it has been a long process. But I mean, I think it needs to be. You need to be so sure about what you're going to be doing,
and we've learnt a lot.
So much. I mean, this is our first thing as directors as well.
It's a remarkable debut then, if you don't mind me saying. It really is.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
And I mean it positively. I don't remarkable because it went so horribly wrong. No, honestly, it's brilliant. It's lovely.
Oh, thank you.
And it coheres as well, and there's some nice moments as well. I mean, I've also seen the London version, and I liked it, but I tell you what, it's the first time I've ever questioned whether it's possible for a show, particularly a musical, to be too theatrical. There was something about it which was just a little bit aloof-making because it felt so almost in a theatrical bubble, and this didn't. This actually, there was much more. I mean, it's a smaller venue, which helps, but it was much more intimacy, and some of the things were much better drawn out. There's the moment after Franklin Shepherd Inc., where Frank blanks. This is going to be a difficult sentence. Frank blanks Charles. And what I don't think I'd ever spotted before in any of the previous productions is the difficulty that goes through Mary, because she her friends walk off through 2 doors, totally different doors in this, and she has to work out which one she wants to go to. Now, of course,
she goes for the one she loves.
She goes for the one she loves, whereas you can see that she knows she ought to be going with Charlie. So my question, I have to say, I this is a question I like asking people because, and there's no wrong or right answer, but after that. Are Mary and Charles still friends, do you think?
I think so.
I think so, yeah. I mean, yeah.
And after the show, after the show begins, if you like, at his Hollywood party,
Yeah.
where he actually lets it be known he's not at all happy, and actually it's not going well because he loses his last remaining old friend and his second wife on the same day, and it's all going to pot, really, hell in a handbasket, and he admits it's a poor film. What happens then? Is there any reconciliation with Charles, do you think?
No.
You don't?
I think that's, in a way, the tragic beauty of the piece. It's just, it is so, if you're going chronologically, it's so optimistic at the beginning, and then it's so destructive at the beginning of the show, at the end of the story. I would, in my opinion, this is just, I have been thinking about this recently, I would say I wouldn't be surprised if Frank maybe went off and potentially killed himself, or, like, if you think about, like, all the stuff he's gone through, it's quite dark, but it's something I thought about.
Yes, he is quite.
But I couldn't see them getting back together.
I don't know. I see flashes in it where he's realised, like when and he said the lost unbearable. I know he said it's sarky, but and then he kind of says, "I wish I'd give it all back." I don't know. Part of me hopes maybe that he would
that's a better
try and reconcile with Charlie. Like he
think
should, if he's not too much of an idiot. But
he has been so far.
Frank.
Yeah. I think he's so set in his ways. He can't. He knows he should have changed, but he can't. Yeah. That's the tragedy of his character, really, because he is such a nice guy, really, underneath at the beginning, and he has good intentions. It's just...
Well, he said it himself.
Yeah.
He said, I've said yes when I should have said no, and I've done it over and over and over again.
Yeah,
and
he
he's
just
been
gets
told to go on that boat, not going to see his friends. It's everything. It's him not saying no to the people around him, I would say,
it's just
is
like
his
key decisions,
flaw.
isn't it? It's key decisions which seem minute at the time, but when you take them all into context of the whole story, they're major points.
Yeah.
Well, I find it an odd sort of theme, really, because you're putting on a musical about writing musicals and then everything going to pot.
Yes.
I've also always been terrified when they do their little jokes about the critics at the beginning, and that's it.
I thought that this morning.
I find it very funny. Because it's true, of course. Well, no, fairness. What is I can say this as a reviewer, but we are parasites. You do all the work, and then we come along and tell you whether it's good, which is nonsense. Absolute nonsense. Just one person's view is no better or worse than anyone else's. But I did happen to like the show, so mine's clearly good.
Thank you.
Yes. No, it's really interesting what you were saying, what you thought about Frank, because of course in the original version, when he goes back to do the sort of the prize giving at his school, where they sing the school song in that dreadful dirge, and then he gives a speech, and he finally acknowledges Charles Kringus for the very first time. So in the original version, there is at least some sense of redemption. I can see that actually it is the tragedy exists better in this one. So I suppose there's no right or wrong answer to this. But I'm always fascinated because I love the first version and I like this version. But they are different. They're two different stories with the same characters.
I haven't seen the first version, so no.
Yeah, no, it is. Yeah, it's just the beauty of Sondheim. It's just very interesting stories, very interesting characters,
and it's moving.
It's so moving.
We saw one of our, because we rehearsed in Brixton before we came up here, and
in Brixton,
in London for a few days.
You're Exeter and Brixton and Edinburgh.
Well, we were trying to find a space.
Yeah, we needed a space because most
so we ended
people
up in Brixton.
London, so we ended up in a space in Brixton.
The hottest place.
It was very warm.
Yeah, the sauna rehearsals.
But we had, and some people that weren't able to make it up here, they came to see it. And I was speaking to one of them after, and he was like, "Oh, it's so sad." And you forget from looking at it from a critical perspective and making sure everyone's coming on and off and all that, you forget that it does move you. I think that's something that now being able to watch it with a less critical eye, you do start to see that sort of coming
there's just
through.
like there's line again. It's the same thing with lines. Like there's just lines which are just heartbreaking, which like I mean, there's the obvious ones where Frank says to Mary, "This is the girl I ought to marry," but then there's little ones like when Joe says, "Oh, I hope to God she doesn't leave me," and it's just like
already it's going to happen.
And there's just lots of, but it's even again like watching it from once you've seen it so many times, even just little things you just see people saying and people doing, and it's just so sad because how it's all going to go terribly wrong.
I'll tell you why I think it's so clever, and I think it's because whilst there is love and romance in it, the love and romance is incidental to the main emotion, which is friendship, which we've all had and have lost, and if we haven't yet we will, and in some senses friendship is more, I think, sustaining than romantic relationships.
Yes,
personally.
definitely. I know.
And so it's, I think if that turns out to be the most important emotional response that we have in our life, our friends and our close friends, and then that goes wrong. There is nothing sadder. I think it is one of the greatest tragedies, particularly musical theatre. You know, I think it's sadder than, well, Sweeney Todd's a bit too grotesque, isn't it, to be truly emotional in some senses.
It's more personal though, because I think it's more relatable for an audience.
Oh, definitely.
And the style of it, it's because it does have. We played it quite. I'd say I don't like using the word naturalistic when you're talking about a musical, because obviously it's not.
But they're not doing heightened performances.
No,
they are,
exactly. They are.
They're playing the truth of the emotion.
Yeah, relatable, and I think that's another.
I think the songs as well. I mean, you mentioned Sweeney Todd. I personally am not actually a massive fan of Sweeney Todd, and it's because of the music. I find it. I don't know why. It just doesn't draw me in at all. Whereas actually, I sort of heard this. I've heard the record when he asked me to do it, and sort of listened to a few of the songs. And I actually like the songs. They're nice songs. They're well written, and I think that therefore. It's sort of maybe slightly more accessible on a musical level, and therefore that will draw people into the characters because they sort of are able to listen to the songs and enjoy it, and maybe even sort of gloss over some of the actual sort of difficult stuff that's going on underneath. They're catchy songs,
and it's less bombastic.
Yeah, exactly, much so, and I think that kind of helps it draw it all together.
It does help the thread of intimacy, which you get from the small venue, that you get from the the ins and outs, the small emotions in life, as you say, the small big things hinge on small actions and decisions, and that's absolutely replicated in the score. Yeah, I mean, I think what I love in this conversation is the fact that you're all speaking from the same song sheet, if that's the appropriate term under the circumstances. But forgive me, it seems to me that you have a unity of vision, which is not always the case.
Yeah, no, I
no denials. Anyway.
I don't know how that happened. It's just,
I'm united. It's these two.
No, I think. Me and Jesse. I think we've always kind of definitely had the same vision for the show, and that's really helped. We've never had any issues with conflict of visions, and said Will the same. Like you've all come into it and kind of seen the same thing. Which has been really helpful.
I am acutely aware that I'm standing having just seen a show about two male friends and a female friend. I'm standing in front of two male friends and a female friend who have been working together to put on a show. Do you identify with any of the characters? Seriously, of the main three, do you? Because I don't. Right, let me lay my cards on the table. Okay. I always say this, but I see a lot of Charlie. I feel for. He has the integrity. Maybe this is self-flattering, but and I fancy myself as not a good, but a writer. That kind of thing. So I see Charles as the man who feels the hurt. And he has the anger, and he represses, and all those things actually that makes him. He's not, but it make him British actually.
I think I'd say the same with you. Like Charlie for me is the kind of most relatable character to myself, I'd say. I'm definitely like the thing with Frank. He is so kind of charismatic and just there's something about, whereas Charlie's quite kind of nerdy and reserved, and I think that's a lot more relatable for a lot of people. I mean, there aren't as many Franks in the world as there are Charlies, I'd say.
It happens to us all. Let me say, thank God there are not so many Franks. Although there are an awful lot of charismatic, weak people. And that's his character. His principal characteristic is his weakness. So none of you are now going to say you fancy being Frank.
I can see it. I can certainly see elements of it. I think they sort of, sadly, like not being able to say no to things.
Playing the piano.
It's maybe that's why I hope for the redemption at the end. Right? You're quite happy for him to be miserably for himself.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, that leaves Mary. I think, she's definitely the loyalty. I think she has, and that need to have friends close by her and keeping everyone happy. That's probably.
Oh yeah, you certainly get the impression that Frank and Charlie would have broken up, as it were, years before. If Mary had been a mortar in their wall.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think maybe that.
So, how can people see Merrily We Roll Along? How can they merrily roll to it?
How can they merrily roll to it?
Well, okay. Well, you can you can book tickets through the Fringe website. You can also turn up at Greenside. So the show is 10:10 every morning, apart from this coming Sunday, which will be past that now, but that's fine. But it's on 10% every morning at Greenside Studio 2. It's £5 for everyone.
It's a remarkable deal. If you don't mind me saying. I think you're the best value in Edinburgh.
Thank you. Well, to be honest, that kind of came from because I've done the Fringe the last 5 years, and it is such an expensive thing to do. Not just as a performer, but as just someone just you spend so much on travel, you spend so much on accommodation. It's so expensive, and for me, it just seems such a shame to be charging. I mean, there are lots of shows who deserve to charge £18 for their shows, but for us who this is our first kind of show, I felt
we didn't know if it was going to be any good either.
No,
exactly.
Until Monday, really, the first show on Monday, because the tech was just chaos.
But tech's are supposed to
I know, but it was the first show we got to the end of it. I was like, actually, it's quite good.
Greenside.
It's a lovely venue
well.
out here, isn't it?
Many
nice.
thanks to them for
but no, we didn't think it was right to charge a lot of money for it.
No. And do you have a website?
No.
What's the name of your company?
Oh, it's the Red Oak Theatre Company. We do have a Twitter handle, which I think is... I'm not actually sure. Do you know? It's maybe Roll Along 13, I think, maybe.
It's at Roll Along 13 if you'd like to tweet about us.
But no, we don't have a website. We're quite a newly formed company.
But you may yet. So if people search for Red Oak...
Yeah, something should.
Yeah, well, they come up with the show. I mean, we still haven't actually got round to making a proper full official website or a Facebook page, but we've just been so concentrated on the show.
Yeah. So will you be doing anything else together then? That must be the next question.
Well, I definitely want to do more things with the Red Oak Theatre Company. It was kind of like my brainchild, and I'm definitely going to be doing things. It's definitely in Exeter next year. I'm thinking probably not the next Edinburgh, just because it is so expensive. But I would definitely love to do Edinburgh again with this company of people. So we've not had any problems with the cast or band. That's, I mean, we've done a lot of shows. Touching wood, yeah. But I've experienced, lots of people who are quite disruptive with the casts, and this has probably been the first time I'd say there's been no one in the whole cast or any part of the process who has been disruptive or egotistical.
Weird. It's weird. It's
everyone
really
is very nice and gets on, and it's
you are rolling along merrily.
Yeah, having a merry time.
May I say, it's been a real pleasure speaking to you. It was a real pleasure seeing the show. It is a great testament to you, and it is, it's an exuberant joy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we finish where we started last week, with a conversation with old friends of Musical Talk, Andrew Keating and Eve Herkman, where we start by discussing Stephen Sondheim's recent London platform to mark his 80th birthday. Let's open the doors a little bit wider to Sondheim. We saw Sondheim giving his platform earlier this year. What characteristics did you take home from that? Because there was something I noticed very strongly about that. It was only a half an hour to 45 minutes chat, but there was something I was quite surprised by. All right.
He was quite humorous.
Oh, that's
he was quite funny.
Yeah. But I found him really angry.
Really? About what?
Bitter in some senses. Well, actually, he was quite happy to say who he bloody didn't like.
This is a new thing, though. I was reading some reviews of kind of other gigs he'd done. So, because obviously he's doing the book tour, he's put the book of annotated lyrics out. Yeah. And so at one book festival, he did more or less the same speech that we got about, I don't like Noel Coward, and I don't like this person, I don't like that.
He doesn't like Lawrence Hart either, who worked with Richard Rodgers before Oscar Hammerstein.
It's like, thanks for sharing, Steve.
Yeah. Also, he only picks people who are dead, I noticed. The right of reply is not very available.
Quite. And did he not go for Gilbert and Sullivan as well?
It does. But he doesn't like anything. But I'll tell you a story that Charles
What
Bloom...
does he like, thus?
Well, that's a very good question, because he didn't really answer that question, did he?
I suppose it's easy to say...
Me, he said.
Yeah, I suppose it's easy to say what you don't... They never ask him about Andrew Lloyd Webber, do they?
No, they don't.
Well, he wouldn't answer it because he doesn't want to
insult.
Because he's still alive. Well, possibly. I think he explains that he doesn't want to hurt the feelings of the people that he talks about. And I guess when he at least explains why he doesn't like the lyrics or the music of a certain composer or lyricist, and it's not just doesn't like them, he gives a reason for it, and you might agree or disagree with that reason, but at least it's founded.
Yeah, it's not just hatred, it is it's a justified position, but whether you agree with the justification, I agree, because I didn't accept anything he said about Larry Hart. There are two, I think, significant anecdotes. One that Sondheim gave us himself, which was very self-regarding, and something I was told about Stephen Sondheim by the composer Charles Bloom, who met him. The Sondheim anecdote, which he told himself, was the time that he out-Cole Portered Cole Porter when he went round to speak to a rather old and failing health Cole Porter for the lyrics of Amigos. Not Amigos. What's it called? for the lyrics from Gypsy of Together Wherever We Are. And he said that when he read out the lyrics, and he did Wherever I Go, He Goes, wherever, that one. Yeah. And then he said, and then he plumped it with Amigos, which is the punchline, if you like. Yep. He said, Cole Porter gasped. And that's his... Cole Porter has a reputation for all these clever lyrics. And I was cleverer than him and made him impressed. And that's very, look at me, aren't I good? I mean, I have to say that. That was very much the story I got. And then the story that Charles Bloom gave me when I interviewed him was unfortunately not on the record. We were talking about it as we were crossing the Hungerford footbridge over the River Thames. And he was telling me that he once met Stephen Sondheim. And Stephen Sondheim said to him, Charles Bloom, as a composer, do you see yourself as being in competition with me? And of course Charles said, well, no, of course I don't. You're the great legend, you're Stephen Sondheim. And Sondheim said, but I see myself as being in competition with you. And the way the story was portrayed to me, I got the impression that Sondheim was being very friendly, wasn't necessarily letting his guard down. So he did genuinely see all the new composers, and presumably all the ones who had gone before, as being in competition with him.
Money.
Well, yeah. So that was what I got out of that interview. It's interesting you thought he was being very funny.
I think he was more humorous than I expected. I know what you mean, though. I mean, I think he was... There are only a couple of occasions that he was snappy, and the main one that we discussed earlier, in the sense of, no, it's not about me. No. And he was cross.
He didn't want to talk about the autobiographical nature.
No, and he doesn't want to talk about himself, but on the other hand, he is self-critical.
Yeah.
Quite a lot as well. There's a lot of stuff that he seems to not like about himself. Then again, thinking of Follies again, that whole, and I never really loved me.
Yes.
Okay.
So Stevie's Blues, is that what we're talking about?
Stevie's Blues, yeah.
What was your take on the event?
He came across more relaxed than I've seen him before in interviews, which was actually quite nice. I think he's probably at a stage in his life where he can just be relaxed, and but I think it must have been very frustrating at times when I haven't read Finishing the Hat. I've got it and it's kind of lying ready, but it's
haven't finished Finishing
the
Hat?
No, it's a bit too overwhelming. But I guess you see how much effort goes into what he creates, and I think it must have been frustrating at times getting the little success or immediate reward in terms of either public opinion or reviews for all the effort that he puts into it. And he's got a lot of integrity with what he does, and I guess that's why he's self-critical. So I think he's insecure, but he's not falsely modest, and I think I can appreciate that about him. At least he says what he thinks. He might not always be politically correct, but then again, at least he's honest, and it doesn't deter from the fact that he has a lot of integrity as a composer and as a lyricist, and that one has to admire.
And Jude Kelly was the right person to interview him because
just as well they got it.
Yes, because she actually got away with quite a bit with him. She could actually be quite cheeky with him, which was nice, which I think is why why it was funny in parts, because she was not kind of outright rude, but kind of mocking rude, and that was quite
a gentle
fun.
poke.
Yes, yeah.
I was also very taken by when she asked him which musical, I can't remember if it was one he liked the best or the one he most admired. He plumped for a Rodgers and Hammerstein, but he went for the failure. He went for Allegro. Do you remember that? And he went on to explain the reason he liked Allegro more than any of the others was because he said there was this clever conceit where they had this kind of cyc, this cloth that went across the stage.
Oh, yes.
So there was continuous scene changes without having the blackout, the curtain pulling and going back, It went like a film. And you certainly get that sense from certainly his later works that, and we were talking about this in Passion a few minutes ago, how the songs come out of the incidental music. You get that sense that he has drawn from that he sees theatre in quite cinematic terms, and he has composed for the cinema.
But interesting to kind of pick one of the Lost shows, because again that was a show that was ahead of its time in a lot of ways, because it was telling the story of one man's life from birth to death, which was not like anything else they'd done.
It's merrily the right way round.
Yes, exactly that. Exactly that. And of course, actually, the irony is that's now a harder show to see than kind of any of Sondheim's shows. I don't know if it's ever been performed in the UK.
I don't think most people would be able to identify it as a Rodgers and Hammerstein piece. People can say, you say Rodgers and Hammerstein, they've got Oklahoma, Carousel, King and I.
But if you can dig it out, there's a very good soundtrack with a complete libretto which goes into everything, and it's actually a really good show.
It's the,
From
is it the
a
one that's
modern
got
perspective.
The Gentleman is
The
a Dope?
Gentleman is a Dope,
Which
yes.
is my favourite Rodgers and Hammerstein song. And as
There
you
you
know,
go.
I'm not a fan of Rodgers and Hammerstein, but that song I've always liked.
And it's probably slightly less saccharine for you.
Yeah, very much so. I probably would like that one, wouldn't I? More. So, as we draw our conversation to a close, and indeed this mini-series on the life of Stephen Sondheim for his 80th birthday, I'm going to ask you a difficult question, which is, what is the worst thing about Stephen Sondheim? And then I'm going to ask you to come up with one word which you think sums up his career. No small orders when I ask the questions. So, it's an open question. Who would like to have first crack at what's the worst thing about Sondheim? And this isn't deliberately an attempt to have a go at him. I just want to... Where do gods have feet of clay?
I don't think he does pure entertainment very well. He doesn't need to. For me, he doesn't need to. That's not what I expect
And
from
by pure
Sondheim.
entertainment, you mean spectacle and jazz hands?
Exactly, yes. So that you won't see in any of Sondheim's work. So I think with Sondheim you don't have instant gratification.
No.
When you listen to... When I discovered Sondheim, and the show that I listened to for the first time, it must have been late 80s, was Into the Woods. And I thought, what on earth is this? And I was used to... obviously I was in Belgium, so musicals are not, part of a big part of the cultural landscape in Belgium.
There's no incredibly wise podcast going on about it.
No, I don't think... Who knows? Actually, I think there's more of an interest now in shows, and I think because of the big shows that emerged in the 80s that became popular all over the world, like Les Mis and Phantom and all of that. So then hearing Into the Woods was something completely different. It's always challenging, and I think... So I'm turning it into a positive one.
Very good.
So, but it's always challenging, and I think what you get out of it, and the same with Passion, the more I listen to it, the more I like it. I think that's what's lovely about it. But instant gratification, pure entertainment. He couldn't write a Phantom of the Opera, but I wouldn't want him to.
I think the cult of Sondheim is probably the worst thing, in the sense of it's felt to be quite niche, intellectualised, and it's proper musical theatre.
Once again, this is the fault of everyone who isn't Stephen Sondheim.
Yeah, it's not.
You two are very good.
Well, no, I think probably it is partly his fault as well. I think he probably would quite. I think he quite likes being niche. Why not be niche? Because he's not had huge mega blockbuster successes. He's had minor successes, but he's had longevity through repeated performances. So it's actually been, that cult following has stood him in good stead.
It's a niche jerk reactor.
But without that, his career surely would have been completely different. Would it not be for the fact that some of his shows are kind of done either by small professional groups or by amateur groups, again and again and again. The difficulty of that is you then sometimes set him up as in opposition to other forms of musical theatre, in the sense of, well, if you like Sondheim, then you can't like X, Y, Z. God forbid you might enjoy, Love Never Dies and Passion at the same time. That must never be. It's
I think a lot of people do, of course.
A lot of people do, but it seems to be a bit like that
There's
the idea of it being
snobism.
and the idea of it kind of being proper theatre, in the sense, well, if you enjoy it, fine, you enjoy it, but don't necessarily mark it out as being better or proper.
Well, funny enough, I like to develop that, because my answer is going to be very similar to that, which is actually my problem with Sondheim is not Sondheim, it's what other people think Sondheim is, and mostly other composers. What worries me is the fact that Sondheim is not only intelligent and sort of punctilist in his music, but he's also witty. He's genuinely witty, and so many people have followed what they call the Sondheim tradition without the wit. So there are so many shows which are Sondheim-esque, but are not amusing, entertaining, witty, or have enough lightness of touch in order to make that work. So if you take the lightness of touch out of a Stephen Sondheim show, which he does not, except in Passion, which even now I'm afraid is still my least favourite, you end up with quite a lot of what's being presented as new musicals, and they don't, I love Sondheim, but I don't like Sondheim-like musicals, because I haven't yet found one that's even half as good.
Are you going to name names here, Thos? Are there a set of culprits?
Well, actually, I'm going to go for Ragtime. You see, I quite like Ragtime, but it's not nearly as good as people say it is. And it's very Sondheim-esque.
What about
without
Jason
being
Robert
witty.
Brown? Seems to be kind of the next Sondheim.
Yes, So they say, but once again, Jason Robert Brown, very talented, but in his case, I don't find his melody strong enough. I can whistle a Sondheim, thank you, Jerry Herman, but I can't whistle a Jason Robert Brown, or an Adam Gettle, or a John Michael Accuser, all of whom I admire immensely, but I would admire them more if they were more melodic and they were slightly funnier. And then finally, that one word for the career. I know it's a bit of a tall order, really.
Frogs. No.
Art.
Which isn't easy, I've been led to believe.
And I guess just a small explanation why, I guess, and this is the reason I like Sondheim so much. The reason why I like him is that when you go to the theatre and you see a musical play where songs and lyrics are by Sondheim, it makes you think, it makes you laugh, it's moving, and I think that's what art does. Good art does that to you. It makes you reflect, it challenges you, and I think that is what he does so well. So I think that is what he tries to achieve, and that's art.
What a good word. I wish I could steal that word. I can't think of a better word, Thos.
Well, can I plump for intelligence? And I tell you why. Whilst I admire many other composers like Jerry Herman and the other greats, both of the Broadway tradition and the new clever ones, like John Michael Accuser and things like that, it is the intelligence which Sondheim has. The intelligence that Sondheim displays is accessible intelligence. It's not exclusive. So it has raised the bar in terms of what you can expect in a musical. But it hasn't raised it into obscure intelligence. So that's what I like about it. I think I pitch at the same level as him. I'm not for a suggesting I'm as intelligent as he is. On the other hand, I'm also not suggesting that I'm not as intelligent as he is. Make of that what you will.
I'm lost.
I'm too stunned, Thos. I'm too lost for words.
Andrew, Eve, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with me. It's been a real pleasure, and it's always a pleasure seeing you both anyway. But to discuss Stephen Sondheim with two esteemed colleagues and friends makes it even the better. So we'll meet again in 100 years' time to discuss how it's going.
80 years' time. 80.
80, it's the 160th.
We'll celebrate his 160th. That's right. That's right. Musical Talk. And it's an interesting question. Will people be celebrating Stephen Sondheim's 160th birthday in the future? I think they will. I think Stephen Sondheim is going to be remembered in the same way that people remember George Gershwin and Gilbert and Sullivan. I think he is lodged in the canon of musical theatre greats. And quite rightly so. Well, thank you for joining me for this second part of my tribute, which I could have entitled Raiders of the Sondheim Archives, but I haven't. And we'll continue to pay tribute to the late, great Stephen Sondheim here on Musical Talk in the next few editions, and then begin, alongside everybody else in the world, to finally start to work out what his enduring legacy will be as we progress into 2022 and beyond. But until then, goodbye. This tribute episode of Musical Talk edited and presented by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2021. To find out more about the world of Musical Talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our website www.musicaltalk.co.uk or subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can at MusicalTalkThos.